Welcome to Richplanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Thank you. Now it's a little bit dark in here. I hope everyone can see me. It's just so that you can see the screen. The screen's more important. Okay. Now, I was bowled over by the response to this talk. People have come from all over the UK, in fact. As well as the northeast locations of Northumbria, Durham and Tyne and Wear, Sussex, West Midlands, Aberdeen, Yorkshire, Somerset, Nottinghamshire, Northamptonshire, Lanarkshire, Port Talbot, London, Lincolnshire, Lancashire, Humberside, Derbyshire, Cumbria, Cheshire, Cambridgeshire, Bristol and Cleveland. So that's not a bad turnout. Have I missed anyone? Sheffield. Okay. All right. Right, okay. Yeah, this talk is in the first part. We're in 3 parts today. Just some formalities first. If anyone wants to go outside, I don't mean now, I mean later. If you go out this door, turn left, there's a balcony running right the way along here with some picnic tables. You can sit outside, watch the football, smoke your fags, whatever. Today's talk is called, or the first one of 3, is the media, mind control, and RAL mode. And those 3 terms will become apparent throughout the first part. Now, this is part of my 2012 tour, and this is actually an additional talk that I wanted to put on to the 13 previous talks that I've already done this year. The reason why I felt it necessary is because 2 of the things I'm going to be talking about in the second and third parts have local connections. RAL Moat and the Wilson and Blackett conspiracy. And really I'm trying to find information from local people about those 2 cases, and you can only get the truth from local people because you cannot get it from our media now. And that will become apparent as well in today's talk. Now, the reasons for my 2012 tour is so that I can get some feedback from the TV shows, so that you can meet me. When these sort of subjects are discussed on the internet, people are faceless on the internet. You can never really quite trust who you're talking to. You meet them face to face, it's a lot better. The other reason is it does enable me to make a little bit of revenue to keep going with what I'm doing, because I don't actually get paid to make the TV shows. They do not pay me. The only money I make from the TV appearances is through the products that I sell in the adverts, and that is not enough to generate an income to keep me going. So these talks are a source of income. My background is in engineering. I qualified as an electrical engineer in 1990 from Newcastle University. That's a picture of me at Newcastle University. So my mother used to say, fiddling with wires. Richard's fiddling with wires again. She once said to me, Richard, is it really necessary to have a car battery in your bedroom? And I said, yeah, doesn't everyone? Okay, now the thing about my TV show, I got involved in TV sort of about 4 years ago. Don't quite know how. It started because I set up a website all about UFOs, and a TV channel contacted me, an alternative TV channel, said, hey, we like your website, would you like to do something for television? And I grabbed the opportunity with 2 hands because I understood the importance of media and how the media was being controlled and still is being controlled. Now, the thing about my TV show, it is entirely independent. There's only one person writes the script, there's only one person researches the show, there's one person films and records it, and that's me. The TV channel have no influence whatsoever. They have not objected to anything that I've sent to them. So it is truly entirely independent. And that cannot be said for any other TV show that you will watch on the TV, including the alternative media. Okay, now I don't have any secret sources. I don't know any MI5 agents or anything like that. All my information comes from the internet, it comes from television programs, it comes from information that I get from talks like this, and I have had some excellent information from people who've come to these talks. Now, a couple of very important facts that over the last few years I have exposed on Richplanet television. The first is about 9/11. I'm going to make a statement here. This book is the only comprehensive scientific investigation into the evidence of 9/11, written by a qualified professor of engineering mechanics. Could not be better qualified to carry out such an investigation of the evidence. And this book proves, beyond any doubt whatsoever, that what destroyed the towers or made them turn to dust was a directed energy weapon. That is now an established fact. It is not a theory. It is a fact, and it is proven in this book. That is what happened on 9/11. Now, once you realize that and read this book, you then realize that that type of technology would not be in the hands of men with beards sitting in caves in Afghanistan. Okay? Osama bin Laden died in 2001 in December. We've been fed a huge lie about 9/11. 9/11 was a false flag operation carried out by the US administration at some level to give them justification to invade the countries that they wanted to take control of. And unfortunately, the same is true of the terrorist attack which happened in London in 2005. That was orchestrated by British intelligence agencies. And this book, Terror on the Tube, Behind the Veil of 7/7, proves that the 4 young Muslim men it was blamed on were set up as patsies to take part in a mock terrorist training drill. There is no evidence that would convict them, which is why they are still totally innocent under our law. Our mainstream media have completely lied about the London bombings. Okay? These are 2 established facts. There is no debate about this now. There's enough evidence to prove this in court, that both these events were false flag attacks carried out by Western governments, not by Al-Qaeda or Islamic terrorists. Rant over. Now, I'm not saying that I have an answer to this. I am launching a new campaign. I've just put this on my website and I'm launching it today. And every single person in this room can help with this campaign. A lot of people say to me, what can we do, Richard? What can we do about this? Well, this is one small thing that you might be able to do. And I'm going to show you a short video here of what I did on the 1st of September, and I would like everyone in this room to copy what I have done. It's called Tell Your MP About 7/7. Okay, it's Saturday the 1st of September 2012, it's 9 AM in the morning, and I've come to Birdley. Now the reason why I've come here is because I'm going to hand over some very important information to my MP, Dave Anderson. Dave Anderson is a Labour MP, and I've got some basically documentation regarding the London bombings of 2005. Viewers will know that I've extensively covered the London bombings on the TV show over the last couple of years, featuring Nick Colostrom, Anthony John Hill, and also intelligence analyst Tony Farrell. And I'm going to be handing over to Dave today, firstly, the book Terror on the Tube, written by Dr. Nick Colostrom, Behind the Veil of 7/7, a copy of this document, which was written by Dr. Rory Ridley Duff of Sheffield Hallam University, that looks at the events at Canary Wharf on the day of 7/7. This document, written by ex-police principal intelligence analyst Tony Farrell. This letter written by Dr. Nick Colostrom to Justice Lady Hallett, who sat at the inquest. Also going to give him a copy of the film 7/7 Ripple Effect, which seeks to expose the truth about the London bombings. And also 6 interviews that I've conducted with Nick Colostrom, Anthony John Hill, and also Tony Farrell. And with all of this information is a covering letter in which I state that the overwhelming body of evidence proves beyond reasonable doubt that the 4 young Muslims who have been blamed by mainstream media for carrying out the bombings are totally innocent. The mainstream media have grossly misreported the facts about 7/7 and are at best ill-informed and at worst complicit in the bombings. There is not one shred of evidence that would convict any of these young men, which is why under the law they are still totally innocent of any charge. Okay, so all the details are on the website, and what I'm asking people to do, there's a zip file, you download it, you print out 6 documents, it's about 40 pages, ring your MP, book an appointment, sign the letter, and then give them the documents. And I've got a list of all the 600 and odd MPs on my website. When you've done that, if you email me the name of the MP that you've given it to in the constituency, I'm going to tick that off on the list. And if and when you get a response letter, if you can scan that in and email it to me, because I'm going to collect them all. Because I want to try and get every single MP that information. Because at least they've got the information. Because what I said to my MP was, I said, when the truth comes out about 7/7, and people are put on trial, the real criminals are put on trial, I know what will happen. All the MPs will go, we didn't know about this. This is the first we knew. My MP will not be able to do that. So he'll be in the dock with the rest of them. Okay? And we need to bring pressure on the MPs. No one really has lobbied the MPs, I don't think, on 7/7. Not en masse, not on all of them together, and that's what I'm trying to do with this campaign. Okay. No, that's not Raoul Moat. This picture, to me, represents the state that the human race is in at this current time. The guy on his knees there. And David Icke's recent book is called Human Race, Get Off Your Knees. And I would agree with David Icke on that. We do need to get off our knees. But the problem is we're in this headlock. Okay? Now this headlock, most people aren't aware of it. And I would describe this headlock similar to what Zbigniew Brzezinski described it, as the technotronic control grid. Now the technotronic control grid, as described by Brzezinski, who was one of the most powerful men, or has been, advising various American presidents behind the scenes, this is a range of controls that are brought to bear on society without them knowing it. Now, one of those controls is the control of mainstream media, and our mainstream media has been completely controlled for decades. And anyone who disputes that need just look at this man. This is David Rockefeller. He is one of the people who is behind some of these semi-secret groups which tell governments what to do and what policies to have. So he is behind the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergers, who choose the American presidents and fund American presidents and then tell them what to do and what policies to adopt. This guy is more powerful, or has been over the last 50 years, than any president. And in 1994, he stated the following: "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. So that's going back to the 1950s. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the light of publicity during these years. But now the world is more sophisticated and prepared to march towards world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries." So what he's saying there is that their plan is to create a world government, and it is going to be run by an elite group of bankers and oligarchs, and the rest of society are effectively slaves to them. That's what he's saying in 1994. And the control of the media, which he's describing there, extends to this country through the likes of Rupert Murdoch and the BBC. But these groups are behind the control of that media. Now, the counterpart to someone like David Rockefeller might be this man, Webster Tarpley. He's a historian and geopolitical commentator. And in his book, 9/11 Synthetic Terror, he explains why 9/11 was carried out by the American administration. It's called false flag terror. They need these events in order to justify and expand their empire into different regions. They blame it on whoever it is that they want to take control of. And in that book, he explains how all false flag operations have various parties. So they have a patsy. That's the person they're going to blame the false flag terrorist attack on, Osama bin Laden, or the 4 completely innocent Muslims who were blamed for 7/7. Then they have the technicians. These are the intelligence operatives or military who actually carry out the terrorist attack, who you never see. And then there is the mole, the person or political person who sells the fake, bogus story, such as Tony Blair or Dick Cheney. Now, if we just come away from our planet and represent this technotronic control grid by this invisible hand. There are a number of pillars or strands to this control grid, and I'm going to describe some of them. This is just some of the methods that these high-level groups are using on society. And I've just categorized them: money, mind, media, military, and mouth. By mouth, I mean anything that you eat or drink or drugs that you take, for example. Now, if what I'm saying is true, people say, oh, we're being controlled by this invisible group. What a load of rubbish. Our elected leaders would surely stamp that out. Well, unfortunately, the strings of power from those groups come down into our leaders. They select and steer our leaders. So that would never, ever happen. And what about our parliament? Well, I refer to our parliament, I refer to politicians as prostitutes in suits. That is because they have not sold their bodies, they have sold their minds. The reason why they have sold their minds is because they do not speak the truth. None of them. Not one of them is brave enough to stand up in Parliament and talk about the truth about false flag terrorism. I happen to know that one politician, I know his name, knows that 7/7 was an inside job, but will not publicly say this. So they're prostitutes in suits because they have sold their minds. You might credit them with being agony ants at best. They go to their constituencies and they listen to their constituents, but they have no power to create real change. And I would actually say that members of Parliament are not politicians. How can you say that, Richard? What a crazy statement. Well, what is politics? Politics is the discussion of things which bring about real change in the world. And I mean real change. Our politicians don't discuss things that bring about any change. And I'm going to illustrate this. Let's just say that the political landscape, politics, is being played out in this football stadium. And the players on the pitch are the political players in politics. What are the issues which really bring about change or have brought about change in our world? I'm going to list some. The central banking system and the way that that is organized, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit. Okay? Politicians have got no say over how the Bank of England is controlled and central banks in general and how money is created. They're out of the loop on that. The media, most politicians are actually duped by the media. They believe what the media says and they can't see through the lies. False flag operations, again, 9/11 and 7/7. They wouldn't even acknowledge that this is the truth. But these false flag operations have brought about massive change in the world because they have caused leaders to be deposed and millions of people to be killed and administrations to be changed in foreign countries. So that is exercising huge power. And our politicians aren't even aware of it. So it brings about military operations, which they are not part of. And again, they do not know about no politician knows about the hidden technology of 9/11, the advanced energy weapon. So how can they claim to have any power? Commodities such as oil, coal, food, and water are all controlled by corporations. They're not controlled by our politics. And health policies are decided by organizations such as the World Health Organization, which impose their rules on various governments. Now, if you look at my picture here, there's a little football pitch outside, a five-a-side pitch with some kids playing on it, jumpers for goalposts. That's our parliament, all right? That's the power that they have. Because let's just list the sort of things that they argue about and make decisions on. Are we going to have 17.5% VAT or 20% VAT this year? Are we going to increase defence by 1% or reduce education by 2%? Does it matter? And fake scandals. They love arguing at length about fake scandals, such as the phone hacking. That was a fake scandal, and I will explain why. Whenever they come out with a scandal, the latest one is this interest rate fixing scandal. It's not a scandal. Whenever you see the word scandal in the media, replace it with the word PSYOP, psychological operation. It's all planned from start to finish. But the MPs get whipped up in these fake scandals and spend their time debating it. So they have no power. It is pretend power. Most people think that they have power, but they don't. And I think most people in their souls, they know that no matter which party they vote for, there's no change. So they actually kind of know they don't have power, but they're not aware of these issues that I mentioned in the football stadium there. Now, because it's fake power, they have to have more prostitutes in suits to sell that fake power to the public, like this man here. He has to sex up, oh, this politician said this, politician said that, and make people think that this is real power, when it isn't. If only he'd been in my class at school. Okay. Now, I'm going to just very briefly talk about money, because money does control people's lives. Most of the major decisions you make are controlled by how much money you've got. Now, I'm just going to make this very simple, because there's so much wind, you know, windbags talk about money on the TV, and they always miss the point. And I'm going to try and make it as simple as possible what's wrong with the monetary system in our world. Let's just imagine that all of the monetary centres, shall we say, are football teams in a league. So you've got the banks, you've got the government, you've got private industry, you've got individuals, you've got maybe public organisations such as the health service. And each of them is a football team trying to get money, okay? The bank's team, their home ground, is on an angle of 30 degrees like that, and they're always allowed to kick downhill. And not only that, their goal is the quarter of the size of everyone else's, right? So they win every match, and they get all the money, okay? They win all the time, they win every time, and everyone scratches their head and they say things like, well, I know, let's stop the players' bonuses. We need to knock those bonuses on the head. Because that's what they say, isn't it? We've got to stop the bankers' bonuses. Is that going to solve the problem? Because the club's still going to be rich because it's winning all the games. That's not the problem. That's not the solution. What is the solution to that problem? The solution to that problem is to level the playing field, right? But the problem, and make the goal the right size. But the problem is that most people don't understand how to make that playing field level. And this is how they get away with it. Now, I'm going to list 3 things that would make that playing field level, that you will never see discussed on mainstream television, because the people who control the banks also control the television. And here's the 3 things. Firstly, a sovereign government with sovereign currency is impossible for it to be in debt. If it is in debt to an outside entity, then it is not the government. The outside entity loaning it the money is the government. The government should have the authority to print the currency. That's the first con, because the debt that the government is in, we pay the interest to the government who give it to an outside entity. The government should have authority to produce and print the currency itself. Okay? They disguise the loans by issuing bonds and calling it quantitative easing, but they're in debt to outside entities. That should be impossible. That's the first thing. The second thing, the method by which money is introduced into the economy is called the fractional reserve system. That's where money is created by the central bank. It's loaned to commercial banks that you and I can use. They then loan out that money. That's reinvested, and they loan the same money out again. So they can loan the same piece of money out several times and get interest each time. Now, the net effect of the fractional reserve system is that over time, 10, 20 years, the wealth of the common man is gradually sucked into the pockets of the bankers, right? That system always ends up like that. So the fractional reserve system needs to be wiped out. So if you put your pound in the bank, it stays in the bank. They can't re-lend it. If you want a loan, you get it centrally from the government. That's the second thing that needs to change. And the third thing is that usury, the charging of interest on loans, needs to be made illegal. So if you need a loan, you get it from the government interest-free, possibly with an arrangement fee. Now, if you do those 3 things, you can immediately wipe out inflation. Then you wouldn't need to put your money in a bank, because your pound will be worth the same as what it is now in 40 years' time. Those 3 things would make that playing field like that. But I can guarantee not one person will discuss this on TV, because the playing field like this suits the people who are pulling these strings. Now, a lot of people ask me, they say, Richard, will you cover fluoride in water? I mean, maybe this water here has got fluoride in it. Aspartame in fizzy drinks. These are all huge worries, because there's no doubt there are massive risks to your mental state if you're drinking fluoridated water. But it's an area that I've steered clear from, because I don't feel that I'm qualified, but I've realized that there is huge conspiracy in the pharmaceutical industry. For example, pharmaceutical industries, it's not in their interest to cure anyone, people who are making drugs. It's in their interest to keep people ill and keep them on a drug where they're getting paid for. That something needs to change with that. They need to be rewarded for getting people off drugs and you know, making them well. So, but as I say, I've steered clear of that area. It's just such a massive area, health, and I wish other people would cover it in shows like mine. If I could fund it, I would produce another show like mine, focusing purely on health. Okay, now, in the military. Obviously, the military is used by these oligarchs to expand their empire, to march towards this world government, and we're seeing this now in the Middle East, and I have no doubt the focus, once they've got control of the Middle East and they've got all their bases in there, and they've got countries which are subservient to them, they will then move on to the Far East. I've no doubt of that. And the military, over the last 10 years, have increasingly used these are unmanned drones. They're bombing the shit out of Pakistan with them. I don't know why. I don't know what Pakistan's done, but they are. They're killing hundreds of innocent villagers with these unmanned drones. And they're controlled by people thousands of miles away, sitting in an airbase, drinking hot cups of coffee, and they go and have their dinner, and then they go and kill another village. It's absolutely crazy. But they're trying to bring in legislation to put these drones in our skies. And the excuse that they're using is that we need it for CCTV security. They're going to try and pass that. And our prostitutes in suits will vote for it. And obviously the military have, I am convinced they have, covert technology that they used on 9/11, such as directed energy weapons. And it's anyone's guess as to what other technology that they're hiding. Okay, now, on to one of the main areas I'm going to talk about, which is the media. And of course, the media massively controls people's minds. Now, there are a number of methods that our media currently uses to trick people and to make it's perception management, essentially, make you think what they want them to think. One of the things that they use, I call it a phony bone of contention. So what this is they have a story that they create contention over. So there's an argument over something. And in the subtext of that story is a flawed assumption, which you automatically accept. I'll give you an example. This story here, betrayal of a 7/7 bomb victim. Born to British parents, married to a British housewife. This was in the Daily Mail the other day. A symbol of British courage, so why is he now facing deportation? So inside the paper there's a picture of this guy who was a victim of the London bombings with a bandage on his head and he's got blood on his face. And for some reason, I don't know what the reason is, they're deporting him for something. So it's trying to get you emotionally involved in this argument to say, isn't that terrible? He was a victim of 7/7 and we're deporting him, it's terrible. But what is the subtext of that story? The subtext of that story is 7/7 bombings were carried out by terrorists. So you accept that automatically if you get involved in that argument. So they do this very cleverly. They've probably just searched for that story or find someone who's having a hard time who was involved in 7/7 and put it on the front page. And then we can subconsciously remind people that 7/7 was a real event and it was carried out by terrorists without having to mention that specifically. There was a great one the other day. Anyone see the story about the Queen supposedly talking about Abu Hamza? So the argument with that was, ooh, should the Queen be talking about Abu Hamza? Or should the person have written the story or eavesdropped on her? When you're getting involved in that argument, what are you doing? You're accepting the fact that Abu Hamza is a dangerous terrorist. Now, Abu Hamza was very good pals with Rashid Aswat. You don't know who he was? He's an MI6 agent. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if Abu Hamza is as well, or some kind of controlled entity. But by having that argument with the Queen, you automatically accept. There was another one in the story in the press the other day. It was suicide bombers. Now, I'm very, very skeptical. Whenever they say there's a suicide bomber, I say, well, show me his leg and I'll believe it's a suicide bomber. Or show me his mother crying her eyes out. They never do, okay? And they were arguing over, someone said, oh, there was a teenager. It's terrible that they're so young. And then someone else says, no, he was 28 or something. So they're having an argument over how old the suicide bomber was. So what does your brain do when they're having that argument? It immediately goes, well, of course there's a suicide bomber. It's the phony bone of contention. And they do this all the time in the news. And this headline here, I actually think, I could be wrong here, but I think there's a possible subliminal in that headline. I'm just going to show you it. Bomb victim Kate. There's been several of these. A lot of them about Harry. You know, so this story on the right with Kate is completely unrelated to the 7/7 story, but they align the text with the person. So your eye, that goes into your subconscious. I don't know why they would want to put that there. I think they're possibly planning some false flag thing involving the royals so that William can then be catapult. No, I'm not saying they're going to kill anyone, but it's some fake event which will catapult William to the position of king. Okay. The other thing that they do is what's called a media hit piece. So they can choose any person and make that person look like a prick if they want to. All right? So I've given an example here. Who do you think is probably the most honest, decent person in the UK? Anyone give me a name? Someone who you would never think anyone would write a negative story about. Yeah. Say again? Who? Oh, Muad'Dib. Okay. Anyone else?
Nick Pope.
Nick Pope. Okay, well, I'll tell you who I've chosen, right? I'll tell you who I've chosen. How about Bobby Charlton? Okay? So I thought, well, he's considered, you know, he's never done anything wrong. He's won the World Cup and all of this. Could you write a hit piece on Bobby Charlton? It was really easy. I'm going to read it out. Aging ex-soccer player Bobby Charlton, 74, born in the northeast Pitt village to a family of peasant coal miners, is well known for his incomprehensible Geordie accent. Having left his favourite pastime as a footballer at the age of 35, he hasn't done a day's work in his life. Although some would question whether football can be considered work in the first place. He tried football management in 1973 with part-timers Preston North End, who were soon relegated. So poor was his record there, the following season he made himself player-manager, thinking he could sort out their problems on the pitch by reinstating his now ageing legs. The following season he left, realising that he couldn't manage a child's Christmas party, never mind a football team. Totally unemployable and desperate, but wanting to continue to exploit football for money, he went begging back to the hugely rich Manchester United, where they took pity on him and made him a director. A director of what, though, is not known, with him having so little to offer the club, although he seems to do well as a director of nothing, with his 5-bedroom detached house and top-of-the-range 30-grand Jag. Last year, Charlton was voted the 4th greatest Manchester United player of all time. But that's hardly an achievement when you consider the top 3 were adulterer Ryan Giggs, alcoholic George Best, and karate kick madman Eric Cantona. Charlton has distanced himself from his wayward blood sport brother Jack, who enjoys killing wild animals on a regular basis and was known for hacking players and occasionally breaking their legs. So vain is Bobby that when he began to lose his hair in the 1960s, he refused to go bald gracefully, sporting a style of stranded, isolated hairs, which would often flop around when he was running before he would tug them back over his head. This style today is still known as the Bobby Charlton comb-over and is undoubtedly Charlton's only lasting contribution to society. So they could pick anyone in this audience, find a few negative things and make you look like a prick. And they do that. They've done it with several people. They did it with Charlie Sheen because he started talking about 9/11 truth. Now, media collusion is another thing, another trick that the media use, or another thing that they do. And you can verify this just by going into any news agents and looking at the titles, that they are all colluded. They're all singing from the same hymn sheet. You've just got to read them. There is no alternative view. Supposedly the Daily Mirror is meant to be alternative, but that's with writers such as Tony Parsons. They're not alternative. They're controlled opposition. And this can be demonstrated by this next clip.
And the Daily Mail has a picture which sums up the feelings of many Libyans. They tore the head off a bust and then put some shoes on top of him, stamping on the bust of the tyrant's head, "We'll get him."
And Express choose to focus on the public sector's big pay boost.
Let's just take you live to Tripoli. I want to show you some pictures there. This is people in Tripoli in the centre. I think it's Green Square, renamed Martyr Square, call it. Choose your name.
Officially,
really.
I suppose,
Yeah,
still Green Square, but renamed by those. But as you can see, a huge throng of people now turning out. We spoke very briefly to Schwab this morning, who described the scenes of jubilation and celebration, saying it was a very good day.
More on that after 7 o'clock. Now, back here in the studio, Sam.
Okay, so that footage was actually in India, okay? So obviously either there were no celebrations in Martyr Square or the BBC couldn't be bothered to go there, one or the other. But the point I want to make is, why didn't ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5, all of the other channels jump on that and have that on their main news or their satirical comedy programmes to take the piss out of that? I only read about that in the alternative media. So why aren't they doing that? Surely they would. They're supposed to be in competition for news, so they would exploit that, surely. But they didn't. And that's because they're all singing from the same hymn sheet. And if you were to expose that, it damages their official line, which is that Gaddafi is evil and needed to be gotten rid of. I've got another example here. Again, it's about Libya. Just look at this. This is a documentary which went out on ITV about Gaddafi and his supposed arms.
We lost many good officers, many soldiers, because of this.
Gaddafi's weapons had upped the ante.
We were forced off the roads, which then slowed down our progress, which is why we eventually had to travel by helicopter. As always with counter-terrorism, there are technical changes which take place, and you have to go through that sort of technical business, each side trying to outdo the other, technically.
Yeah, technically.
With Gaddafi's heavy machine guns, it was possible to shoot down a helicopter, as the terrorists' own footage of 1988 shows.
Okay, anyone know what's wrong with this? Anyone know what's wrong with that? Say again? Well, it's got IRA written on it, yeah. It's from a video game. It's actually somebody filming the TV screen of a video game. That's not a real tank or anything, okay?
This was what the security forces feared most. It may have been a lucky hit, but for the army,
the helicopters, it's a video
once was
game.
enough. No one died in this attack.
Sure, no one
There
died
were
in
many
this
other
attack.
deadly arms to fear.
They introduced a whole new class of weapons in terms of safe-firing mortars.
Yeah, I've got the bullshit button.
Caution detected. Take precaution.
So, the point I'm making is not the fact that they've screwed up with that clip. The point is, why didn't all the other channels have that? Why wasn't it on the Radio 4 satirical program? Oh no, they didn't want to expose that because it undermines their bogus story that Gaddafi was some kind of threat. And he had nothing to do with the aeroplane incident at Lockerbie. That's a whole other can of worms. Now, media blindness. If a story, a big story comes up that would hugely undermine, again, their agenda, they just put the blinkers on, they completely ignore it. And I'm going to draw an analogy here just to explain this. I apologize in advance for putting obscene pictures up on the screen. Let's just say Nick Clegg, he decides to recruit some bodyguards. So he gets 3 bodyguards, and one day he says to them, I'd like you to murder the chief of the Metropolitan Police, please. And the bodyguards say, hang on, we're supposed to be your bodyguards, we don't do murders. And he says, well, look, if you don't do it, I'm going to kill your family, but I'll pay you for it. So they do it. They murder this chief of police. Then he asks them to murder the Foreign Office minister. Then he asks them to murder a health minister and various other people. He says, will you now blow up the police station? And they go and do it. They do all of this dirty work, okay? And then the British government find out about it, okay? So they issue an arrest warrant for Clegg. So Clegg jumps on a plane and he goes up to Scotland. And the Scottish government say, no, we're not handing him over because this is just it's just political football. We're not going to hand him over, okay? Now here's a question. If that actually happened, should that be on the news? You would imagine so, wouldn't you? That should be on the news. It should be the major news story. In fact, it should be the major news story in every country, without a doubt. I'm going to tell you, this allegedly happened. This happened. Not in the UK, in Iraq. This is Tariq al-Hashimi, the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq, or was, and in December 2011, last year, his 3 bodyguards all gave detailed confessions the fact that Tariq al-Hashimi was ordering them to go around, and they actually describe in detail the people who they shot and the bombs that they've planted underneath cars, etc. Okay? Now, that's barely been on our news, certainly not been on TV news. If you dig around on the BBC website, you might find reference to it. And al-Hashimi, I mean, look at this is in the Iraqi Interior Ministry. This is the administration that the West put in place. And this is them issuing the arrest warrant. Where's the BBC microphone? Where's the CNN microphone? They completely ignored this story. And they said in the American media, they said, oh, these very, very grainy confession videos. Now, I tried to look at these confession videos, okay, and I couldn't actually find English translations of them. So I actually downloaded the whole thing from the internet and I took it to a friend of mine who's an Iraqi, and I've got him to translate the whole thing. I've actually got it here. I'll probably not play all of it, but this is a translation of some of it.
The first time officially sent for me to do work for him in 2009. His office was in the palace, the presidential palace, and when he sent for me, he said, I'm going to ask you to do an important task, and this important task is dangerous. And the only reason I sent for you because you're one of the loyal one to me and I can trust you. He said, whatever I'm going to ask you to do, I want you to do it, to carry it out, because you're important to me, and in the same times, your family and the people around you are very important to you as well. He said, I took that as more or less like as a threat, where if I don't carry out what I was asked to do, things could happen to my family. He said, I understood what he meant, and I said, yes sir, I'll do whatever you want. He said, we're going to give you a parcel which contain explosive, and we want you to plant it in one of the squares in Baghdad, in the Mawani Square. And he said, parcel? He said, yes, which contain explosive. And he said, well, this is not our job. Our job is bodyguard to protect him. And Ahmed Qahtan, the secretary, said, look, you're a bodyguard. If you die with him, you die with him. If you prepare to save him, you'll die with him. So whatever he asks you, if he asks you to die, you'll die. Whatever we ask you, you'll obey orders and you'll do it. He said, now I've told you, now we cannot go back, because now you know what we want you to do. You cannot go back. Your destiny is with us. You go to the deputy's house, which he has a house empty, just she's got security there, and you collect the parcel from there. And he said they use the house basically to store ammunition and explosive. You go and collect the parcel from there, and I'll give you all the details tomorrow on what to do with basically the parcel. The target was the general manager of the health. That's the target. They tried to assassinate the general manager of the health service for the east side of Baghdad, which is called the Rasafa. He said we waited in that area until the cars or the convoy for the general manager to pass. Then we managed to detonate the explosive by remote control. The next day, the Deputy Prime Minister sent for us, and he said, we shook our hand. He said, thank you very much, you've done a great job, fantastic. And as on the way out, he gave us an envelope to say, this is present from me. That's nothing to do with his wage. He said, just share it amongst your group of people. He said, when I come out, I've opened the envelope, it was $3,000. This is the first operation we carried out for Tariq al-Hashimi, and that was carried out in 2009. We asked us for the second task, which to assassinate a member of the government who works in the foreign office or foreign secretary or foreign state. The third operation was to assassinate Muqaddam in the army is like General Ihsan. Basically, he asked us to assassinate him. That's the third task that I asked him. He said the target is going to be white pickup Nissan with the general sitting there. 7, 8 minutes later, the target did pass us. He said, so we drove next to him, and the soldier who was sitting next to me carried out the operation, assassinate the general. From one car to another, yes. It was the 1st of January 2011. It was holiday and the road was empty. He said, Tariq al-Hashimi is going to give you a bigger task in the future. Before the 1st of January 2011, we also carried out 2 operations. The operation was basically to assassinate Dr. Hadi al-Amari and to assassinate him in Muhammad al-Qasim Street. We detonate the car basically by remote control with that person in. Now in April 2011, they carried out operation to assassinate. We drove next to him and basically we shot him from the car. After that, we carried out another operation to eliminate police, traffic police, and that happened in the Nasur Square. After we seen him in there, he said we assassinate him by the silencer, by using the silencer gun. Was one particular, well, high up in the police, in the traffic police. Another incident what happened in 2009 December. Another traffic police with his wife. That's in Said al-Hadid. He said we followed him in the car and basically we assassinated him and his wife. Yeah. He's talking about another incident to plant explosive bomb in an area called Bab al-Sharji. It's basically to plant a bomb in that area to blow up convoy for the army, belong to the army. They planted a bomb next to the Hummer who was parked next to the door. I pressed the button, the remote button, to blow up the Hummer. This has happened in May 2010. Now is another task they're going to carry out in the Dora area. He said when we got there, the target was the police station, and in front of the police station was a block of concrete, and on the block of concrete there was chains. I've hung the parcel next to that. He said the parcel was quite big because wanted to cause maximum damage, and it was a police car. 3 people lost their life through this because explosive was so intense and so big to cause maximum damage. When they left the police station, we blew that up instead. Personally, I was trapped. I'm a captain in the army. I was basically stuck and trapped in that operation. Tariq al-Hashimi has destroyed my life. I wanted to go higher and higher in the army, and basically I got trapped in his undoing. He destroyed my family as well. Basically, I was threatened, you either work with us hand in hand or we'll finish you and finish your family as well.
Yeah, al-Hashimi really, I think, is a puppet of the Americans. He's got links with the Council on Foreign Relations, and I think in 2006 he met with Bush, where it was mentioned in the media that they discussed ways that they could deal with the more extreme elements of the new Iraqi government, i.e. people who were loyal to Muqtada al-Sadr, I think it was. So he's currently in exile in Turkey, and they've actually had a trial in Iraq, and they've given him the death sentence, but he's had in Turkey. The Turkish government are protecting him. And he's saying, oh, it's a kangaroo court, blah, blah, blah. But there's 3 people giving identical testimonies to that. And this is what our media are reporting. If you go on the Guardian website and other websites, they'll say, he claims it's a kangaroo court. So they're kind of siding with him. But why they're doing that? The reason why they're doing that is because they don't want you to know that certain people who are being murdered in Baghdad by bombs are being done by the administration that was installed by the Americans. They want you to think it's insurgents or Al-Qaeda, so it massively undermines the bogus story that they put forward, so they don't report it. And by the way, Press TV, which they've banned from the UK, the Iranian news channel, has a lot of, will expose a lot of these type of stories. Now, media diversion. I said before that I believe that the phone hacking scandal wasn't a scandal. It was a diversion. I'm going to explain a huge, huge anomaly in this story, which tells you that it doesn't hang together. There's something wrong with it. And you've got to realize that Murdoch is far more shrewd and clever than you think. He would not allow himself to be put in front of a panel like this and be grilled. In my opinion, he is acting, and he has orchestrated the events to put himself there. Okay, and I'll explain why I think he is behind him being grilled, right? When the story broke last year, it came about, the closing of the News of the World came about because of 3 stories which broke 3 days in a row. On the 5th of July, they said the News of the World had hacked Millie Dowler's phones. Now, first point out, phone hacking is listening to messages that other people have left. It's not listening to people talking or conversations. So someone leaves you a message, it's in your mailbox. If you haven't set a password on your mobile phone, if someone else knows your mobile phone number, they can dial a number and they can retrieve that message. This is what they were doing. Okay, now I'm not saying it's right, but that's what it is, listening to messages. That's what they mean by phone hacking. Now on the 6th of July, the following day, it was revealed that the Soham families, the 2 girls that were murdered, their parents' phones had been hacked. And then the following day, oh, Madeleine McCann's parents. Now, immediately I see that just looks like a psyop to me. It's a psychological operation. What it's doing is it's pulling at your heartstrings. All these little girls that have either been murdered or gone missing, 1, 2, 3 after the other. You're pulling at your heartstrings. You're not critically analysing what's really going on here. Now, because of this supposed scandal, on the 8th of July in the press, it was announced that the News of the World would have to close because this is such a scandal, okay? And this article here This is in the Telegraph. This was at 7:17 p.m. on the 7th. So it broke very late on the 7th. That was when the decision was made that the News of the World would have to close. Now, it says here in this article that speculation was mounting last night that News International was already planning to launch The Sun on Sunday as an alternative newspaper to replace the News of the World. What do you need? You need a domain name. You need to buy a domain name. The domain name for The Sun on Sunday.co.uk and .com was purchased on the 5th of July. Now, if it was purchased on the 5th of July, that means probably the decision in that organization has been made before the 5th of July. They're going to buy that domain name. So that means they knew those 3 stories were going to come out in the news to force it to close. That, in turn, makes me think that Murdoch was behind those stories. And you might say, well, why would he do that? Why would he do that? The reason why he would do that is because you ask, what is Rupert Murdoch's real crime? All of his news organizations have not told the truth about 9/11 and 7/7. So he is an accessory to murder as far as I'm concerned, right? Because he's covering up murder in his news organizations, okay? That's a pretty serious crime. And if you look at the date, the 7th of July, when the phone hacking supposed scandal was at its height, what's that date? It's the anniversary of 7/7, when we had Tony Farrell, a principal police intelligence analyst, coming out saying that it had been done by the government. So we had all of these headlines on our papers. We didn't have anything about 7/7. So in my opinion, it's a smokescreen. It's a bit like, let's say you want to burgle a shop, and you're a burglar. You're going to get all the money out the safe, okay? So you're there, you're burgling it. Someone rings, someone sends some children in to steal some sweets, and they ring the police. And the police are chasing after the kids who've stolen the sweets. There's a guy in the back, and he's helping himself to the safe. So they put one crime in front of another crime, which is much lesser, and they blow that smaller crime out of all proportion, which is the phone hacking scandal, PSYOP, okay? So they can blow that story out, so no one's really getting to the real story, the crimes of 7/7, accessory to murder. That's what our mainstream media are. It's a complete diversion, in my opinion, the phone hacking thing. They wanted something to put on the table that they could massively exaggerate. I think, what, one person's gone to prison over it, maybe? It's not a huge crime if you think about it. No one's died because of it. It's not the same as covering up the murder of 56 innocent British people. That's what they're covering up. That is a massive crime compared to phone hacking. Okay, and their psychological operations are endless in the media. When one of the completely innocent supposed suicide bombers lost his life, what they did, he worked in a bookshop called the Ikra Learning Centre. This was in Beeston, where he lived. I think it was in 2001. They sent some police officers and the media to that bookshop where he had worked. And it was selling things like John Pilger DVDs and 9/11 truth videos. And what they did, the police got there and they said, right, we're going to break your door down, we're going to raid it. And the guy was standing there with his key. He said, no, I'll open the shutters for you, you can have a look around, we've got some John Pilger DVDs, what have you. The police said, no, we're going to break the door down. And the media cameraman was standing there, break the door down with the guy standing there with his key, and the following day, in the newspaper, Islamic fundamentalist bookshop raided by the police, who this supposed bomber worked at. That's called a psychological operation, and our newspapers are full of those bogus stories. When I was at school, I had no interest whatsoever in history. I was more interested in fiddling with wires, as I've said. I didn't really understand the importance of history when I was younger. But if you think about it, if you think about any person who has power today, such as a monarch or a prime minister or whoever, an oligarch, they get their power because of what has happened in history, whether that be this century, last century, or even in Dark Age British history. That determines who has power in conflicts that have gone on in the past. And if you start to unearth things that contradict the story that people have been told to get those people in power, they're not going to like that, okay? And just to talk about briefly historians, most historians who work for universities, they have a curriculum and they'll teach the same thing every year. And they have students and they have papers to mark. And they will use library books written about history. Not many of them really go out into the field to try and find evidence of previous history. And Alan Wilson and Baron Blackett, that's their bread and butter. They've been trying to unearth new histories since the late 1970s. Alan Wilson on the right here, he was 80 this year, and Alan has a degree in economics and history. He also did 2 years of an archaeology degree, but he got called up for national service. And make use of Alan while he's here, because he's got more knowledge about history than anyone that I know. He's a mine of information. And Baron Blackett on his left, who's his co-author, let's just say Baron's got a very unique mind. Okay, so the two of them together make a very good team. And they have made some incredible discoveries. I only became aware of them in 2010, and that's really because they've not been given a platform for their work, because there's certain things that they have discovered that people don't really want out in the open. Now, the methods that they use they're fairly straightforward. So they'll consult ancient maps to get place names. They've dug up various artifacts. They use ancient poems that often will give information, ancient British documents, and they've written 9 books so far. So they're all, the top 3 here, which we've got on display, these are all pertaining to their King Arthur research and their King Arthur work. The hardback Artorius Rex discovered, that describes the discovery of Arthur II's burial site, and we're going to briefly touch on that. So in this talk today, I'm going to spend half of it just on their work and to explain to you why it's so important, and in the second half, I'm going to explain to you what's happened to them. Because if you're not aware of this story, I warn you, it's going to shock you. Okay, their later books, the Trojan War talks about the Trojan War of 650 BC. Moses and the hieroglyphs. Alan actually has worked out, Alan and Baron, how to decipher Etruscan and hieroglyphics. And their final book, again, a controversial book, they claim they know where the Ark of the Covenant is. And I'm going to come on to that. But this is their bread and butter. If you go in their house, which I have done many, many times over the last year and a half, they've got these genealogy charts of British kings on their walls, huge charts that they've constructed using a whole array of different documents. Now, and they've charted 80 British kings and worked out the genealogies for them from around, I think, 50 AD up to sort of 600 AD. And I don't think there's any other historian produced such detailed genealogy charts of the various British kings in that period. Now, this is an 8-minute video just to try and explain some of Alan's work. And we've got, I did a series which was 6 hours of DVDs here. It's all been on TV. We're going to probably get these repeated. But this is just a snapshot. It's an 8-minute video just to introduce you to the sort of King Arthur research.
Wilson and Blackett started in 1976 trying to find the truth about King Arthur. After 14 years of intensive research, they purchased a church which this research was suggesting was the likely burial site of the legendary king. They excavated that site in 1990, and an artifact was unearthed by a digger. This occurred when Wilson and Blackett were not at the site. The object is a solid electrum cross, which could have only been made for an important or wealthy person. It has been dated to the period of Arthur, which is prior to 600 AD, and has an inscription which reads, for the soul of Arthur. What are the chances of finding that artefact by coincidence at the very site they claimed could be the King Arthur burial site?
You get a line of princes. You get a son of Arthur I, Tathal, then Taithrin the Subtle, Taithfalt or Theodosius, Tudrig, Theodric, Meurig, Maurice, and then Meurig's son, Arthur II. And so you've got two Arthurs very clearly exhibited. These are not hidden. You find them clearly in the manuscript evidences that everybody else uses when they're writing about British history. Right, here on a 1980 Ordnance Survey map, you've got the Mynwent y Milwyr, this monument of the soldiers of the military on Myned y Gaia, Fortress Mountain. We're going there. Now, in 1983, a mere 3 years later, we've got an addition to the maps in the form of a motorway, but up on Myned y Gaia, here, right, can you focus in? We've lost the Mynwent y Milwyr. So we've gained a motorway and we've lost the most ancient and precious of the monuments. This is the monument of the soldiers. This is it, here. This is it. And you can see the whole of the bloody kingdom from here, just about. You can't see up the valleys, but you can see the whole bloody kingdom from this point.
For Alan Wilson, then, this site, taken together with other evidence, pointed to the location of Caer Caradoc here, in Morgannwg.
We began with 2 accounts from the ancient records of the secret burial of a king in a mummified form. We now have 10 accounts, most of them from the 6th century AD, contemporary with the death of King Arthur. These accounts actually name the mummified king who was wrapped in a leather bag and brought to this river for burial in a secret cave. His name was Arthur, and he's so named in the manuscripts. And what happens is that Siniltid is sitting at his cave, and the ship arrives, and there are eminent people in this boat that puts out from it, and they've got the body of a dead man, who was really some big guy. They bring it to Iltyd, swear him to secrecy, and he buries the corpse in the cave. Now, the cave exists, it's still there.
According to the Welsh genealogies, St. Iltyd and King Arthur are first cousins.
So we've got an account of a secret burial in Glamorgan at the very time that King Arthur, who's the only senior member of the royal clan who goes missing, is recorded as being concealed in his burial. The cave was actually sealed up until about, I think it was 1886. A man from Cardiff went down there and he got a local quarryman and they put teeny bits of dynamite in and they blew the opening out. Duck your head down. You have to keep down coming in, you know. Come on, duck down. Here is the grave pit. You can see the squared off ends, square that end, squared right on there, very, very straight and square this side, and another square end that end. He was buried in the cave. Later, then, when they got the things ready, they took him out of the cave, put him in the church, you see.
Right, which you at some point bought.
We had bought the church. Church of Wales had let it go derelict, didn't want it. We said, you sell it to us? They said, yes. We said, okay, we'll buy it. Right. Of course, it's the oldest church in Europe. It's built in the year sort of 50 AD.
50 AD. Right.
We bought it.
But they didn't know. They didn't know that when you bought it off them.
Well, that's not for me to tell them, was it? You know? They didn't want it.
Yeah. So, okay. So you are.
So we now owned it, so we could route about quite free from any hindrance. And we did find a stone.
And what did the stone say?
It says Rex Autorius Fili Mavrici, which would the
King Arthur.
yeah, but
it's Electrum, which is 79% silver, I believe.
yeah, so we took it to the largest and most reputable company in this sort of business, who do all the work for the oil companies and everybody else, and they've got all the systems there, and they have all the necessary tables and records historically, which show what the mix of various impurities would be in certain eras. You follow me?
Sure.
And they've tested it for us.
And tell us what the inscription on the front is.
Well, it says Artorius. And there's a man on a horse. You can pick him out in the middle.
Oh, in the middle there.
That's Arthur, I suppose.
On this cross here, that's King Arthur. Yeah.
The time is 6:16. In common with most historians, the two men believe that Arthur was an authentic king of Britain who gave rise to the legends of Camelot, the Sword and the Stone, Guinevere and the Knights of the Round Table. Laurie Mayer reports.
The apparent proof that King Arthur was man, not myth, is kept at the bottom of a garden in Cardiff. This ancient sword-shaped stone inscribed Rex Artorius, King Arthur, comes from what's claimed to be the legendary king's last resting place. The stone is said to have arrived by boat up the Owenny River near Bridgend 1400 years ago. In their lifelong quest for the real King Arthur, amateur historians Alan Wilson and Baron Blackett have put their interpretation on ancient manuscripts.
An impeccably authentic manuscript of the year 822 tells of the body of a very important man with a stone being brought up this estuary.
According to Wilson and Blackett, this is the very cave where the body was temporarily buried. They point to signs of a square-cut grave hewn by hand from the rock. They claim the local church provides evidence of Arthur's family links with the area. Burial stones they regard as vital clues in their historical detective work.
And this is the stone of Paul, son of Myrick, a brother of King Arthur.
At Ogmore Castle, just down the road, they cite another stone actually naming a King Arthmail, which they translate as Arthur. Wilson and Blackett have now filled several volumes with their exhaustive fieldwork and research, a mass of evidence from so many sources that even academics find it hard to contradict. This bleak hillside, 1,000 feet up, marks the end of their quest. In a church they describe as the Westminster Abbey of the Dark Ages. Wilson and Blackett claim it's cost them their homes, their jobs, and £100,000 to find this spot and say with confidence that here lies King Arthur.
Half Britain was waiting to see it, and at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, they scrubbed it.
Right.
Went on the 1 o'clock news, it was widely received, phones were ringing all over the place. It went on at 6 o'clock news, and half Britain must have been waiting at 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock, and they pulled it. And they showed a piece on Sarah Ferguson squeezing herself into a tiny little aeroplane to have flying lessons instead. There we go.
Yeah, well, I want to see that.
Oh, yeah. What an edifying sight. Bum.
Tell us about the... Right, so I'm going to list some of their discoveries, and as I say, the books are here, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, really. As I said, the genealogy of 80 British kings, burial sites of King Arthur I and King Arthur II. They believe that Arthur I is buried in a place called Oldbury. They have carved stones associated with both of those burials. The solid electrum cross that you saw there, which is believed to be King Arthur II's burial cross. Alan has also located the legendary Camelot and several other ancient sites of that era. Alan has also linked the Culbran alphabet, which is an ancient British alphabet, to Middle Eastern alphabets such as Etruscan. And I think at this present time, I don't think there's anyone who can actually read Etruscan. Alan will tell you more about this, but he believes it's linked to the Culbran alphabet. And that can be translated into Welsh and then English. Okay? But this is something that the academic establishment won't look at. They've got their blinkers on with it. Now, some of their claims, they claim to know where the Ark of the Covenant is buried at a place called Ynysybwl in Wales. Now, for those who don't know, the Ark of the Covenant is the box which Moses built to house the Ten Commandments in around about 1400, 1350 BC. So Moses went up the mountain, supposedly Mount Sinai. He was given the Ten Commandments by God, which were carved on 2 tablets of stone. An enclosure was then manufactured, which was a wooden box, gold-plated, and then a solid gold box after that, and then another wooden gold-plated box. This is the Ark of the Covenant. Now, I don't think there's many academics, historians dispute that that box exists, or existed, and it was in King Solomon's temple, I think up until about 586 BC, at which point it was raided. And there's various, and this is what the film Raiders of the Lost Ark is about. It's probably the most important religious and historical artifact that there is. But nobody seems to know where it is. Now, there are several scholars who believe it came north after that time through, Alan believes, Lemnos, and ended up in the British Isles. Okay? And Wilson and Blackett claim to have traced it to a place in Wales, and we'll come on to that. They also claim that there's a silver casket containing wood from the cross of Christ concealed in a cave in West Wales in a place called Nevern. And obviously I'm not presenting the evidence for this, it's all in their books. They've claimed to have located the burial place of Empress Helen, who was a 4th century Empress, Alan. Numerous other treasure sites around South Wales. This is an artist's impression of the Ark of the Covenant. Okay. I've got a little video here of Alan speaking a couple of years back about the Ark of the Covenant, because their evidence of it coming from the Near East up to the UK. There's various documents that they cite. This is the Ark coming to the UK, but the placement of it in this particular mound, this hill in Wales, is very intriguing to me. It's all to do with the stars. I'll let Alan explain this in this next clip.
All over South Wales, Glamorgan, Gwent, there are huge mounds, mainly on hilltops. Huge earth mounds, I mean really big earth mounds, size this room. Some are smaller. And my colleague said to me one day, he said, Alan, what's that one up there, you know? And I said, he said, a bloody, I said, a bloody head. Oh, I said, that's a ferocious warrior. And sometimes a penny drops, doesn't it, you know? The ancient Arabs, Hebrews, and Egyptians called the star constellation Hercules the ferocious warrior. And a penny was dropping, oh boy, because over to the other direction is Tumbalu, the he-goat, Capricorn. And over the other way, we had a bloody boat ship on the top of the hill, and that was spot on for the great constellation of Argo. Now, if you've got 2 or 3 stars, you can triangulate and find a pole star. Am I right? So we did, and it's a standing stone. And from there, we found all these big mounds. They're all named and located for stars, the major stars in the heavens. So you got a star map on the ground. They go on about the NASCAR drawings, don't they, in Peru? We got something better and bigger. Just outside Cardiff on the Garth Mountain, there's 2 big ones and 1 little one. It's right for the belt of Orion. Down in Morganstone below, big one in the woods. And you can find the 4 outlying stars of Orion. Come across the way in Cardiff, houses built all around it. Taurus, big mound. Another one on the other side of Cardiff, on top of the hill. Aries are up, and you go on the Capricorn. And they're everywhere. And that's how you get after the Ark. All you got to do is find Regulus, which is the biggest of the lot. You see, we said Regulus because Regulus star is the biggest star in Leo, the lion. And Leo the lion is the emblem of Judea and Jerusalem. So we thought there's a good chance that that's it.
So it is suggested that the large earth mounds found all over South Wales were laid out by the ancients in a pattern to specifically represent first magnitude stars of various constellations. Wilson and Blackett have produced many star mound maps which confirms this theory. The mound which represents the star Regulus turns out to be at a place called Unis Abul. Just outside this village is a prominent hill or mound. According to Alan, the top section of this mound is man-made.
Is this where the Ark of the Covenant is?
Yes, in our opinion, yes, and I'll tell you why. It's a man-made mound, about 4 acres of it, 60 feet high, all man-made, on top of another hill. Someone in antiquity built a stone wall around the top, right? There are 4 sumps on the north side, like big hollows in the ground.
Okay, metal detection has been done on that hill, and I've interviewed the guy who did the metal detection. He's called Alan Hassel, and he explained to me exactly how he did it, and he's told me, honest guy, that there's a 4 foot by 2 foot non-ferrous object so many feet below the surface. And there are sumps on the side of that hill that Alan has identified, which are to drain and keep the central chamber dry. And I've had negotiations with the farmers to try and get back on that land, have further testing done, and they just will not cooperate, which is another story. So why could this research be dangerous? Now, the King Arthur research in particular, I'm just going to let Alan explain some of that.
Well, Iestyn ap Gwragedd dies, was deposed in 1091. He allegedly had 14 sons and several daughters. The Welsh gentry, then sons of the lesser ones, all, as in England, kept their pedigrees and their genealogies. And I don't think the British public is generally aware of the huge mass of manuscript evidence that's available in this way. So there are many people around today who can, and some of them do, claim their descent from Iestyn. Actually, the last king was a descendant of his. Morgan was killed in 1300 AD.
Which goes back to Arthur II.
And they all go back to Arthur II, who
Right.
dies in 579.
Right.
Arthur II is son of King Moerig or Maurice. He is a sixth-generation direct descendant of Arthur I, who is Arthur who invaded Europe. His father is a son of Magnus Maximus by Magnus's first wife, Cynric, not his second wife. And he is the only son of Crispus Nobilis Flavius Caesar. Well, Crispus is the eldest son of Constantine the Great. He's the son of Helen, big British princess, and the Emperor Constantine Chlorus. Helen is direct descendant of the Holy Family.
Right.
So it starts to wobble about all over the place. Now, obviously, the Queen of England having 2 parents, 4 grandparents, and then 18, has got about a putative 500,000 descendants, ancestors, sorry. So it's quite possible she could trace back into these lines anyway. But obviously, she's not, in the sense of Britishness, she's not the senior person.
So it undermines
it could
who
undermine.
is the
It could
actual
undermine it, yeah.
true monarch.
In the sense of descent from Brutus and the British kings, yes.
Because Alan and Barham have had a litany of attempts to derail their efforts. And this, again, this is just the tip of an iceberg, what I'm going to list on the screen. Okay? Some of it is in the DVDs that I've made. There's 3 programs, 3-hour-long programs, which go into the smear attempts and the murder attempts against Alan Wilson and Baron Blackett. And I'm going to list some of them. They were framed for stealing jewellery in the 1980s. That went to trial, and they got bad media press. And this was at the time when they were writing the King Arthur books. There was a smear campaign instigated by historian Geoffrey Ashe. There was a smear campaign, letters written to all media organisations claiming that Alan was a criminal, which wasn't true. This is by someone called Ian McGregor, who was a straw man. Their bookshops were visited by MI5, and they were told that they weren't allowed to stock them, or they were told to take them off the shelves. Alan's house, when they were living in Cardiff, was raided by the police. They said they were looking for a casket. They tried to sue the police over this, and the trial was cancelled 6 times. They got bad media publicity for this. The church that he mentioned that they bought, somebody vandalized that church and started digging up bodies and stuff, and it was reported in the media that it was Alan and Barham that had done this, so they got the news articles saying that they were grave robbers. This all went in the press. It wasn't true. They've exposed corruption in the Welsh Arts Council and in an archaeological funding organisation, which tells you why they're not getting the funding, because these groups were corrupt. They were framed for stealing paintings from a church. That went to trial. Alan Wilson nearly ended up in prison over it, and it was completely fabricated. They were framed. Barham was framed for a serious assault, which also went to trial, and on CCTV camera, he wasn't the person who perpetrated the assault. They were driving along the motorway where they were going to one of these trials. A van pulled up in front of them. The doors opened, and a jackhammer, that's one of these big pneumatic hammers that's used to dig the road, was thrown out in the front of their car when they were on the motorway traveling at high speed. The jackhammer went straight into the car. They could have easily died in that incident. They had an attack on a property that they were staying in Malaga, that they believed that was possibly a murder attempt. They've also been poisoned. Okay. Now, one of the less sinister things that's happened to them is that they had some brochures stolen, and I'm going to let Alan explain what happened to them in the 1980s when they were trying to promote their King Arthur, because what they did, they started a business trying to get bus trips and bus tours to come and see the grave of King Arthur, and they were trying to promote that and sell it to the travel industry.
You're wanting to promote this work and the history and get people visiting.
That's right.
So you've got to go to the biggest exhibition in the UK in London.
Latest coaches will take them round.
Right.
And we'll take them round in the coaches. We started coach trips going on.
Right.
He applied for a grant which is available to anybody in Wales for brochures, funding for brochures, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was told, yes, you can have the funding, but on no account must you mention the name King Arthur, and on no account must you mention the name of Wilson or Blackett. You delivered your brochures to the tourist board in Cardiff. Everybody did that.
Right.
They had a big stand, and there were tables, 4 chairs, and racks for literature. Well, companies hire then that table, or maybe 2 tables, and the chairs as their little company patch on the tourist board big stand, you see. They have a little dummy, well, they had a little dummy Welsh cottage in the middle, and about 20 of these areas with tables. Well, we hired or rented 1 table with 4 chairs and some stands on this.
So you're trying to sell these tours to travel companies and maybe American market, that kind of thing.
So we get along. We stayed in Bayswater for the night. We were up there early, 8:30, 9 o'clock. We're at the place. Of course, the tourist board don't bother to arrive till 9 o'clock. They get there. The exhibition's opening at 10. There's frantic activity everywhere. I don't know if you've ever seen an exhibition before.
Oh, yes.
And all the bunting and bits of wood have been tossed around. Right alongside were skips. 9 o'clock, they opened the door. Everybody went in, got their literature out, except ours. Ours wasn't there. Now, it had been loaded on the truck in Cardiff and sent on the night before, and so had everybody else's. They all got theirs, but ours was missing, not there. So this is a bit like, phone calls from Clayton back to Cardiff. Where is this stuff? Nobody knew. Well, it's on the manifest. It was sent to it. Should be in Olympia.
This is cardboard boxes full of brochures.
Big, heavy boxes, 4 large boxes full of brochures.
And we've got one of the brochures there.
So I'm looking on. I could see this skip alongside, and these trucks were coming away, taking the skips of rubbish away, ready for the opening. And this is pretty full. So I walked over to it. And I could see, I was looking over my shoulder, I'm a bit streetwise, and I started throwing things out of the skip to see what happened. And there were faces glued to the windows of their little Welsh cottage office, I'm on here. I got into the skip and I'm throwing the rubbish out. I'm a nice new suit on, I got a brand new shirt and tie, I'm dressed to the nines, I'm inside the skip throwing the rubbish out. And of course, the workman came up, what the... are you doing? People are gathering round, lunatics. And there, in the bottom of the skip, were 4 large, well-wrapped bundles of brochures. They'd escaped out of the tourist office at night and hidden themselves in the skip, and they were trying to escape from Olympia. So I called my colleagues over and we got these out, took them over to the stand.
The bastards.
The bastards, you got it right. So now, out of the tourist board office comes this large man with a big black beard, and he comes over to Clayton Jones as if I'm not there, my colleague. He said, you get these 2 off this stand. No, I'll give you 2 minutes to get them off or I'll throw them off. So I hang about. We've rented that space. We're directors of the company that's rented it. Pardon me, it's ours. So he turns to stride back to the office. So I went after him. I said, hey, you, come here, you. I said, you want to throw me off? You try it right now. Of course, I'm younger then. I'm going to pop him, you see. And he ran and shut himself in the office. He wouldn't come out.
Right.
So with that peace reign then, we just got our brochures in the racks and carried on.
Around about the turn of the millennium, I think it was, Alan and Barham relocated in Newcastle. They live in Benwell. And in 2008, there's a block of flats which overlooks their property. And in 2008, 3 people moved into that block of flats independently, who were all coincidentally from London. And they know that one of them is associated with the other one because the wife of one of them moved in with the other one, and then he came and lived there 4 months later, and then she moved out of that flat and into the other flat. So they know that there's an association between at least two of them. And they also know that one of them has claimed that he has been inside for, I think it's 6 years. Okay, and they suspect, although they don't know, that the other two might also have criminal records. Now, shortly after this, Alan and Barham have got a secured property. It's got its own grounds, and they've got two guard dogs. They've got a Rottweiler and a Belgian Shepherd. Now, I've been round to their house dozens of times, and I've never heard the dogs bark. They're guard dogs. They bark if there's a problem. And apparently, these neighbours were flashing strobe lights at the dogs, throwing food, trying to get the dogs to bark, and then they would complain to the local authority and the police. So it was as if they were trying to get rid of the dogs, and that actually went to court, and Alan was fined for that. But Alan and Barham believe that these three people have been sent by someone specifically to intimidate them. And when you add all of the other stuff into the equation, if you were to come out with that claim, most people would say, and don't be ridiculous. But when you add all of the other stuff in that's happened to them, it doesn't seem unlikely to me. Now, on the 14th of August 2011, just over a year ago, 3:15 in the morning, Saturday evening or Sunday morning, Barham is in bed in his bedroom, Alan's in bed in his bedroom, and suddenly Blackett was woken up by a noise underneath his bed, and very, very quickly his bedroom became an inferno. He managed to stumble out, and Alan woke up in the other bedroom, went out onto the hallway, and managed to pull Barham out of the bedroom. But ambulance came, and Barham nearly died. He was in a coma for 10, 11 days, and he was given a 25% chance of living by the doctors. Okay? Now, this is photographs of the fire after the fire brigade had put it out. So the fire brigade put it out, and then they left. Okay? As I say, Barham was in hospital. He was visited by a priest, and the word was that he was probably going to die. Now, again, more photographs of the fire. And he had tubes. I just took this photograph the other day. He had tubes put down his throat to clear all of the smoke out of his lungs. Now, after he came out of hospital and they started tidying up the mess from the room, they realised there was the rafter underneath the floorboards had this curious chunk, semicircular chunk missing out of it. And Barham actually he claims that he has in the past seen an incendiary device operate, and he's convinced that somebody put an incendiary device under his bed and triggered it deliberately at 3:15 in the morning to start that fire. Because he doesn't smoke, there was no candles on, it was the middle of summer, so there was no heating on. And the electrics all worked after the fire, so it was not an electrical fault that's removed a huge chunk from this floorboard. That's it there. Okay. Now, when the fire brigade had put the fire out, the area there where this debris is, the fire brigade didn't see that damage because it was covered with debris at the time. The fire brigade haven't been back in the house since they put the fire out. Again, that's it there. Now, I'll just let Barham explain a little bit about what happened. So it clearly looks as though something has either exploded or, there's an impact where that beam has been damaged. It's not just fire damage. You can see that it's possibly
it is
something.
Combustion, a bomb. It started with the explosion, and then it was followed by the fast and furious inferno, the fire, and that's exactly what an incendiary device does. I've seen an incendiary device in the 1990s by an MI5 operative who actually rented accommodation from us and an office.
Yeah. So an incendiary device will extremely quickly turn a room into, as you describe it, an inferno.
That's what happened. And he's the head of the Northumbria, one of the heads of the main fire investigation department. He said he wasn't smoking. We've got no answer to that. He says, our job is to stop fires and save lives. Mm-hmm. It's a prerogative of the police if it's been suspected foul play. Mm-hmm. And that was the end of it. We have had electricians here, I've had architects here, I've had engineers here, and they all say the same thing.
I mean, this is serious stuff, Baron. This is an attempted murder, if you're right.
It's attempted arson, murder, and conspiracy to murder.
Right.
This is where the incendiary device was placed. You see this coming down here?
Yeah.
You can see the combustion.
Yeah. So there's part of that floorboard.
What I've kept is I've kept the two key floorboards.
Yeah.
I'll get them out now, which were originally here.
Okay, now, Alan and Barham at that time had a young man who was lodging with them. He was living in a spare bedroom. And they think that he may be involved, that he's either been duped or been paid, possibly, to put something under the bed, which he may... They claim that he was told that it was a recording device. So someone's duped him possibly to put that there. But he was the only person who had keys to the house. He's the only person who could have got past the dogs. Okay, now, I'm just going to show you this video of a thermite flare because an explosives expert looked at that damage when he saw my TV show and he said he thought it might be a thermite flare. This is a thermite flare going off. That's a thermite flare on top of a scanner, a computer scanner. So in seconds, it can turn anything into an inferno using thermite. So we're not saying it's thermite, we don't know, but we're saying that it's been started possibly maliciously because of the fact that the damage is centered in one particular place. Now, the fire occurred on the 14th of August 2011. They became aware that it might have been started maliciously round about the beginning of September. So Alan wrote to the police a big long letter explaining everything, explaining the damage and the fact that he thought it was a plot to murder. The police did nothing. They didn't even come into the house to look at the damage. Alan contacted me on the 17th of October, and because the police hadn't come to the house, the fire brigade hadn't come back to the house, they did come to the gate and they spoke to, I think, one of them over the gate, but they didn't come in the house. So I started recording these 6 TV programs just to try and put out this information of this crime that the police were not investigating. My TV series, where I actually did a program about this fire and the fact that we thought it was probably malicious, that went out on the 27th of the 1st. And I sent copies of that to a chief inspector in Northumbria Police, and I also sent it to a detective inspector. I deliberately sent it to 2 different officers, so there's less chance of it being covered up. And I sent them a covering letter with that. Now, at the same time, these 2 letters crossed in the post. Alan received a letter from the Victim Care Bureau, or Alan and Barham received this letter, saying that their inquiries were complete and the case was dropped. And they hadn't even been in the house to look at the floor damage. Okay? So, I thought, well, they would respond to me because I've written my own letter with a DVD showing them all the damage. That's the letter there. Now, neither myself nor Alan or Barham heard anything for a month after I'd written to them with my DVD, telling them that it was on television. So I started chasing the chief inspector that I'd sent the evidence to, and he was avoiding me on the phone, definitely. I got the old, I'll just go and see if I would ring him up, ask for him by name. This is a chief inspector, Bruce Story he's called, and you get the old, I'll just go and see if he's available. Then the woman comes back to the phone. Who's speaking, please? It's Richard Hall. One moment, please. Oh, sorry, he's not here. So, and this is just when I was trying to get hold of this a chief inspector and a detective inspector, they were definitely avoiding speaking to me. And I'll just show you a little bit of that phone call.
Yeah. I believe you spoke to me a little while ago?
Yeah, I'm trying to get in touch with Chief Inspector Bruce Story now.
Right, I've spoken to, well, I've tried to get in contact with both Mr. Story and Mr. Coverwell and explain that you're trying to contact them. They're both out of the office at the moment.
Yeah, right. Okay, now eventually I kept chasing them and a detective inspector who covers their area where they live, he did ring me back, and he had been given my letter and DVD, and this is that telephone call.
Hello, Richard Hall speaking.
Mr. Hall, my name's Dave Culver. I'm a detective inspector at Northumbrian Police.
Hello there.
I understand you're trying to get in touch with me.
Yes, I believe Terry McNamara passed some evidence on to you.
It was Bruce Story.
Right.
A number of weeks ago passed on your letter. I apologise for not acknowledging it. I've since passed it to a DS. I have the letter and the DVD. Both Paul Makepeace and Nick Walker viewed the DVD. I haven't had the chance to yet in front of me here.
Right.
They viewed it. I understand from Paul that the DVD clearly throws up a number of witnesses that we need to speak to.
Mm-hmm.
And that I've allocated, I believe I allocated that out, was it yesterday or the day before, to Nick Walker.
Okay.
So I've asked him to acknowledge your letter, so you should be getting that very soon.
Okay.
And basically we're looking at the content of your report in conjunction with what we looked at the time in conjunction with the fire service.
Right. Okay. Right. I mean, they've. It's my understanding that no officer's actually been in the house to look at the crime scene.
Well, there was a bit of a breakdown in communication between, I think, September and maybe November sort of time. Before we can get get that wheels put back on there and pick up on it again. But I assure you that Nick Walker will be dealing with it and hopefully get some sort of response soon.
Right. Are you familiar with how incendiary devices operate at all? Because you need someone who is, if they're going to investigate that crime scene.
Well, you bear in mind what information we've already got from the fire service, who are familiar with incendiary devices, and there's no mention of incendiary devices on their report. So we'll have a look at that, and we'll speak to the fire brigade again.
I mean, if you look at the video, it's blatantly obvious that it's not a natural fire. It's a bomb of some kind.
Right.
It's an incendiary device.
I really don't know what else, but I know the fire brigade report certainly doesn't say that, and they would certainly, I would be very surprised if they didn't pick up on something like that. I would be amazed, in fact.
I advise you watch the video.
Right, I will do. I promise that. I will be doing that. I know that I think Nick Walker has as well. So the video will be watched by me.
So just to reiterate the fact that when the fire brigade put the fire out, there was debris over those floorboards, and they have not been back to see that. So the fire report wouldn't have those images in it. So that phone call was on the 29th of February this year. And as a result of that, me putting pressure on them, they sent 2 detectives on the 6th of March to interview Alan and Barham. They then heard nothing for 3 weeks after that. So what happened then was, I was actually at Alan and Barham's house, and we phoned them to say, what's going on? You've had 3 weeks. You haven't even, we haven't heard anything from you. You've interviewed us, but have you arrested this lodger? What's going on? So the 2 detectives came to the house, and I was there. There was Detective Sergeant Nick Walker and Detective Constable Harry Tuttle. Alan was stood there. Barham was sat in this seat, the guy who was in the coma for 10, 11 days. I was sat in a chair. And the 2 of them stood in the living room, and they didn't want to sit down, and they were explaining what's happened. Now, this is an edited version of this conversation, because we recorded this conversation, okay? The quality's not great, but you can pick it out, and I've put subtitles on so you can read it. They were here for 40 minutes. I've got a 40-minute conversation on tape. I've edited it down to about 6 minutes.
I sense a slight change in your tone towards us, as though you're not happy with something.
Well, 3 weeks have gone by. 3 weeks and I haven't heard anything, so basically. What about the forensics?
Right. When we came down, we mentioned to you before, the time that's passed since the actual incident to now, there is no forensics, because we could not account for continuity. So it wasn't at the time, that's an opportunity that is lost.
Yeah, but it couldn't have been done at the time. It couldn't be done. It couldn't have possibly been done at the time, any of them, because there was 3 foot of debris.
The fire service make an initial assessment, because they are the experts. I'm not an expert in fire. They are the expert in fire investigation, whether they believe that something is suspicious or maybe a suspected malicious ignition. And then they will make the decision as to whether or not the police would need to investigate that. And they supply us with
They didn't investigate. They didn't even come in the house.
If you have an issue with the police and wish to make a complaint against the police regards the initial investigation, you can do that in person to a police inspector and that will be investigated.
They said quite specifically that it's the prerogative of the police if our police is suspected. All we do is put fares out and save lives.
Yes.
That's exactly what he said. He said, you don't smoke, we've got no answer for that. There's no answer to it. It's not their issue.
But I am investigating it. Yeah. As a result of the programme Mr Hall put out, the concerns raised in that the police were investigating, the concerns that you raised, and I believe you've also written to your local MP.
So the point is that we can do forensics to test for was there an explosion. That's all we need to know, was an explosion. That's all we need to know. We can do that.
If you want to have some independent work done,
we will.
You can do that. It's your prerogative.
I would have thought you'd surely need an explosives expert on it, someone who knows about incendiary devices here and examine that scene.
Right. The problem being is there's a period of time that's gone since the actual fire itself. So you have a problem of continuity over that period. The other part is that the fire service would indicate if they believe the ignition was malicious. I've got a statement of someone saying you had candles in your room, and the fire officer say you had candles in your room.
There's no candles in the room. At least certainly not burning.
But I have two people saying there are candles in your room.
There's no candles burning.
When did it?
Nobody could
Were there candles in your room?
There's no candles in the room.
Say that?
But I have McNeil and the fire officer saying there were candles.
How would McNeil though?
Because he's been in your room.
Exactly. That's not supposed to be in my room. I said
Nobody
that on
goes in each
video.
other's room there.
We're not supposed to be. She's admitted he's been in my room.
I promise you this.
If it was thermite or something like that, a thermite flare for example, there'll be traces of thermite in that wood now. It will still be there.
Look,
You're telling me that if you investigate a murder, someone, the body's found 3 years later, the evidence
not investigating a murder because no one has been murdered.
Attempted murder.
That's what you purport it to be.
Yes.
But from the evidence we've been given at the moment, that is not suggested.
How do you account for part of the actual rafter being blown away? You've seen the rafter, there's a huge...
Right,
there's no way an actual fire
if you
could cause
are
that.
saying that you believe an incendiary device caused a fire in your room, you're perfectly entitled, if you do not agree with what I say, to get someone independent, expert, to look at it.
There's a guy, a bomb disposal expert, has watched my film, and he said he thought it was done by...
If he's going to put pen to paper, if you wish to get him to put pen to paper, by all means do so.
Sure, I would have thought you'd want your own independent explosives expert just to have a look at that.
Right.
Of the evidence.
The evidence, from what I can see, and this is my opinion because I'm not an expert, is it's not an incendiary device. The opinion of the fire officers that I've spoken to, who are experts in their field, say it is not an incendiary device.
So how can it blow away part of the actual rafter, that piece of wood, with an egg-shaped hole?
Well, you tell me why it did. What's the difference? What's the difference between an incendiary device causing that and a candle? You tell me.
Absolutely.
Because it would take days for the candle. A candle couldn't do that.
The
actual piece of wood would not have a huge chunk with the two.
I would.
Well, you're saying that how a fire develops.
But what you're saying to me.
Okay, all right. What I'm saying is that the evidence points strongly to the fact that there was.
Why does it?
Because the damage is localised in that one location, and it was localised at 4 points on the walls.
Right. So what's to say it wasn't an electrical fault that's caused that then?
Because all the electrics were working.
They were working after.
All the electrics, the lights all worked
after the fire. I put the bedroom lights on, all the electrics were working.
You're not an expert, and neither am I.
The fire brigade came here, and they didn't even come in the house. They spoke to me in the air.
The fire brigade?
The fire brigade, two of them. They came in and they said, we've got somewhere else to go. They were on. They didn't even come in the house.
But they've obviously attended on the evening and put the fire out in the room, haven't they?
That's a different
Well, that's a different kettle of fish.
If you present evidence...
These guys have had 2 previous attempts on their lives, so you wouldn't look at that.
In the context of where we are at this moment in time, I have been asked by these gentlemen to investigate the fire at this premises.
The thing is, to be honest, it sounds to me like you're trying to find an excuse for this part. Honestly, that's what it sounds like to me.
First of all, I'm not your pal. I'm a police officer.
Okay.
Secondly, I'm impartial. I'm not trying to find an excuse for anything. But if you believe there's a big conspiracy, you could also say I'm a member of the MI5. And this is all a big conspiracy to whitewash this.
I would have thought, regardless of the length of time that's passed since the event, forensically, thermite traces would still be there.
Yes, but the police will not, the amount of money it would cost to do that, which ultimately would take you nowhere, we wouldn't do that. At the moment, we do not have evidence that a crime has been committed.
Matt Neal has admitted in front of 3 witnesses it was a listening device put in the maid bed. Number 2, he's admitted that it's been in my bedroom to you, right? Number 3, he was the only one with a full set of keys who can get past them dogs. What do you want him to do? Come and give you a confession and fingerprints and print, send it in his own blood before you bloody arrest him.
Now, the day after that conversation, they rang Alan and Barham up and said, we're going to send a forensics team round. Okay, and the forensics team came round on the 2nd of April, and I was at the house when the 2 forensics guys, so the 2 initial detectives came round with 2 new guys, forensics. I was in the room next door. I didn't go in and see them take the floorboards, but they took 4 of the floorboards that were above where the damage was, and they bagged them, they took them away. And Alan tells me that the main forensics guy was shaking his head as if to say, yes, there's something suspicious here. They wouldn't have took the evidence away if they didn't think that. And they told Alan and Barham they were going to forensically test the floorboards with traces of explosives. Now, they then phoned up and they said, well, it's going to take 6 weeks. Now, I've checked this with a serving police officer, and apparently that is the length of time it takes. There's a waiting list at the lab. It's typically a 6-week turnaround time to have something like tests done. So 12 weeks went by and they had heard nothing, okay? So Alan, or I think it was Barham, he rang them up to try and get a response. Eventually they rang back and they were told they weren't going to test the floorboards because it would be too expensive. So, and I've also checked how much this kind of test would cost. You're talking about £100 per hour for the lab time. So it's going to cost under £1,000 easily for them to do those tests. And this is an attempted murder, and they're saying it's too expensive. I've discussed this with other police officers, and they cannot believe they're saying it's too expensive. So they said to Alan, you could come round and collect the floorboards. The police have said they're not going to test the floorboards. The police have said that Alan can collect the floorboards, which they took away for forensic examination, and are now saying, oh, it's too expensive. So...
Let's see what they say.
Can I have your name and number, please?
Right, and what's that for?
Well, I'm going to write a letter after this, and I'd like to be your senior officer in this station.
Right, it's Lee McManus.
Lee McManus.
Yeah.
Well, there's nothing personal.
You've got trouble to make 6 with it.
Excuse me, can I put your video in?
Just the handing over of this evidence.
Right, well, I haven't asked me to video it, so can I ask you to delete that?
I'll turn it off, but I'll not delete it.
No, I need...
Okay.
Well, these were not sawn up like this before.
So that
they were in planks along the line.
Yeah, they were in long planks.
Yeah.
Okay, so are they in different bags then, Alan?
Yes.
Okay, so they've actually been sawn in half. Right, we've got them back, and they've actually been sawn in 2 or 3. These boards were what, 3-4 feet in length?
Oh, 4, 5 feet.
Right. Yeah. Now, I've rang various forensics companies, and I spoke to one guy, and he said, oh, they're nylon evidence bags, and they're specifically for putting fire evidence in because they don't let materials seep through them, kind of thing. And he said what they normally do, he said they come in standard sizes, which is why they cut the wood up. And we can see that the wood was indeed cut. It looks like perhaps by a circular saw. Now, I don't think most police stations have got a circular saw in it. So I think they've probably been sent somewhere where they've been cut up. And he said what they do is, when they do the forensic test, he says they double the bag over at the top and they tie string around it really tight, and that creates an airtight seal. And that's what the bags, you've still got the bags, so they had this airtight seal. And he said then what they do is they cut a very small hole in the bottom corner and they put a probe in to test for the explosives. And I checked one of the bags and it had a little hole in the bottom corner. So we suspect they've tested these floorboards. We don't know that. We haven't got the ability to, we need a forensics team to check to see if a forensics team's been in. I mean, it's just getting ridiculous. So we are seeking to have the tests done on the rafter that's remaining and the other evidence that's still there. So in summary, somebody in Northumbria Police has or is perverting the course of justice and should be arrested. It's as simple as that. The evidence I've presented here makes that blatantly obvious. And really, that's the end of the talk. That's where we are with it. And I'd like to throw it open to anyone who has got any ideas of what the bloody hell we do here. Because, you see, we don't know who is actually doing the obfuscation. We suspect someone in Northumbria Police is taking their orders from MI5. Welcome to Richplanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Many thanks to everyone who has so far taken part in the Richplanet campaign to Tell Your MP About 7/7, which is intended to raise MPs' awareness of the truth behind the 7/7 London bombings. All the details are on the richplanet.net website. We are asking viewers to download 6 documents from the website, print them out, then take them to your MP. You can check from the website which MPs have so far been given the information. If yours hasn't, why not take part? On today's show, we continue with the 2012 tour filmed in Gateshead in September. I will be speaking about mind control, and in particular looking into the Rowell Moat shootings, which took place in July 2010. If you have any information about the Rowell Moat incident, we would like to hear from you, as we don't believe the truth has been told about certain aspects of this case. All that will become clear later in today's show. But first, if you were watching last week, you will know that a person or persons within Northumbria Police have been perverting the course of justice in an alleged attempted murder case. The evidence which proves this statement was all presented on last week's show, and we are appealing for anyone who has more information. The case involved a house fire which is alleged to have been started maliciously by the placing of an incendiary or other device underneath the bed of historian Baron Blackett in August 2011. Following the fire, Blackett remained in a coma for 10 days and very nearly died. After a police forensics team came to the property and removed part of the floor to test it for explosives, 12 weeks later the police then changed their minds, stating that the tests would be too expensive. The floorboards were retrieved from the police and appear to have already been tested. After last week's talk, Baron Blackett's co-author, Alan Wilson, took some questions from the audience. Would anyone like to ask Alan a question? Are you okay to stand up here, Alan? If you come up here. Have a round of applause for Alan for his lifetime work. Yeah, if you stand, what it is, I've only got one set of microphones, Alan, so if you stand where I was, okay, I'll just take 30 seconds to microphone Alan. Just put that in your pocket.
Right. You'll not get it back.
Right. Okay. Keep that there.
Have you verified whether those two policemen, the detective inspector and what have you, came to your house just recently?
Yeah.
Were they real?
Oh yes, they're real. Yes, there's no doubt about that. Yeah. The fire brigade arrived on the Wednesday morning after the fire. They came in through the front gate. I met them in the yard, and I said, well, you know, they said they had to come around after every fire to ascertain the cause. I said, right, come on in. And they said, oh no, we can't come in. We've got another more urgent task to go and deal with. And they were in the yard for under 2 minutes. So that's the fire brigade inspection. So somebody's warned them off, that's clear.
That's what it sounds like, very much.
You're living in a very corrupt country. I don't know if people know it. But
Should we know that? I think just about everybody here is.
Yeah, this is not the first attempt on our lives at all. No. They've had 2 or 3 goes, you know.
Could you not take the wood abroad somewhere where you could be trusted and have it tested?
Yeah, well, we are thinking in those directions.
Yeah.
I've been abroad over the last 10 years 14 times, right? And on 12 occasions coming back, I've been searched. It's all random.
Just was saying, you know, the original suspect.
Pardon?
You know, the suspect that you suspect put the incendiary device.
Yes.
Is it possible to put more pressure onto him that he may reveal more things? I don't know whether that's. I know that you mentioned it.
I am a sly old bastard, and I'm working on it.
Because he may be the key, you know.
Yes, he is. He is, definitely. I think if pressurised in the right way, we can't pressurise him. But if the right people pressurised him, I think he'd crack. Yeah, I think he was conned. If some reason or other wanted information and you can do this and that and the other, I think he was conned.
I'm interested in knowing why the ceiling from downstairs hasn't been damaged, why the wiring is still intact, and
well,
who removed the floorboards?
Well, the fire brigade used a lot of water, and it came through the ceiling, and that's why the ceiling downstairs is damaged.
No, I don't mean.
And when I entered the room downstairs, you know, when I got out of the hospital myself, it was a paddling pond. The downstairs of the house was a paddling pond with water. Squelch on the carpets. So there was a hell of a lot of water downstairs, particularly in the room immediately below.
But I thought with something like thermite, maybe it would have taken the ceiling out, the joist right through.
No.
And the wiring.
The thermite is on top of an open.
You don't know it's thermite. That was just.
We don't know it is, but you got to realise this house is 1784. Oldest house in the area. And the timbers in it and the floorboards are very thick. They're much thicker than the normal ones you'd buy today, you know, and hard wood. So if the explosion is on top, these things are controlled. My colleague here, he mentioned how there's 4 directions. The skirting boards in 4 directions, certainly in 3, patches were severely burned. Patches, you know, because in order to stabilize a device like that, it explodes in 4 directions. You follow me? So it stays where it is. If it exploded in 1 or 2 directions, it would move. So they stabilize it, and it goes in 4 directions and generally up and down, so that the thing stays where it is. The ceiling is not damaged, no, other than by water. But it's an old-fashioned ceiling with a massive plaster and plasterboard and all that on top of it. It's not the modern board, you know, ceiling you buy in B&Q or something.
From the burn pattern, I would suggest it's not thermite, it's phosphorus. Thermite would produce molten iron, which goes down. Phosphorus, lighter than air, you'd get the sort of burn pattern that you are seeing on the wood. Test it for acidity.
Aye. Well, thanks for that contribution. I didn't know that. It's something new to me. But phosphorus will show up in a forensic test anyway, won't it?
You see, what it's like is you'd have a small amount of phosphorus, which would start the whole thing off.
Aye. Well, it went off suddenly.
And then the wood would take hold. Whereas I said thermite, it's going to drip.
Aye.
Thermite is aluminium. It's iron oxide and aluminium. Your result is molten iron. There's no evidence of molten iron around.
I've never said what it was myself because I don't know. What I can say is that nobody has dared to come and look at it. That's the point.
Did you have any insurance, Alan? Is that the question?
None that would cover this, no. Well, what we've always done, night time comes, I go right round the house, every plug is pulled, you know. Every device is turned off, with the exception of the water heating, which is in a small room, which is a sealed room virtually. So everything is off at night, so we don't insure very much, to be honest. And the insurance on that property, I wouldn't like to know how much it costs to rebuild it.
Is it possible to use like a Freedom of Act type of, you know, the Freedom of Act in America, where you can glean information, and possibly if there's any documents that you could unearth?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, on Alan's behalf, I did submit a Freedom of Information request to the lab. It's in Wetherby, which has recently been privatised and decommissioned. I submitted that and I didn't get a reply. So I have tried under Freedom of Information to get the report, assuming that it's been done, which they're denying. The police are saying that it hasn't been done.
Let me, you a second? Thanks. I'll give you, this has been going on for a long time. Richard mentioned an affair of paintings in South Wales. Some paintings were stolen overnight at night in a remote church, 30 miles from Cardiff, right in the sticks. You'd have to go down at least 20 miles of road there. At the time, I was awaiting to go into hospital with cataracts in both eyes. Now, I failed to recognise my own brother at a range of 6 feet. I couldn't see. My colleague was up in London, but I could blunder about the house, you know. I was arrested in my own home and accused of stealing a car, and nobody knew where the stolen car was, right? Driving at 2 o'clock-ish in the morning, at night, I walked out with the dog one evening to walk the dog in the street, and I walked into a tree. That's true, you know. So I couldn't see. I've got out of bed, I've stolen a car, of course there's no record of that. I've driven down these country lanes where there is no street lighting, 30 miles from Cardiff. I've broken into a church, stolen 3 paintings, put them in a car and took them back, you know, stolen out. It's transpired that the paintings had been stolen by another person, and they were using the thief as an eyewitness against me. How could they have an eyewitness at a remote church at 3 in the morning? See, and I'm a little bit cuter than they think. My colleague is cleverer than I am in this way. He had people going around with himself with tape recorders in their pockets, buying the witness a pint, you know, and getting him talking again. He was motor mouth.
Final question over here.
Yeah, sure. No, but the thing is that this is the extent to which they will go. They put me on trial. I had banner headlines in the press. I'm the big thief, stolen 100,000 quid worth of paintings, you know. Actually, they were £3,000. But the point is, they had to fetch their witness from Bristol jail. And it turned out he'd stolen the car, he'd done it. Big procession goes out of court. You can imagine the judges there and all these others with their wigs and the policemen in front and the jury, and I got to walk behind with them. And we go out of the court, across the main street, right in the centre of Cardiff, front of the City Hall, to the Welsh Museum, up the steps. Everybody's looking at the procession, down into the cellars to look at the paintings, you see.
So they didn't deem that too expensive?
No, and the point is, you see, they all stood around, and I thought, I'll get close to this old judge, you see. I got as close as I could. And I knew where they were tripping up. So I said, Your Honour, may I ask my barrister to ask a question? He said, well, ask the question. And I said, what's the weight of the paintings? And he said, what's the weight of the paintings? They said, well, we haven't weighed them. See, they said 2 men would be required to carry them, see? I said, perhaps this lady could tell us. And it's a little woman about this size, a little sparrow, you know, smaller than you. And perhaps this lady would tell us, so she gets across, she's about 50, about £7. I said, so 3 of them would be £21. Now, it doesn't take 2 men to carry them. He said, oh, and you can see where I'm going, you see. I said, Your Honour, may I ask my barrister to ask another question? He said, ask your question. I said, what's the dimension of the paintings? He said, what's the dimension? He said, well, we haven't measured them, you see. I said, well, what's the dimension of the window they were taken out of? They didn't know. I said, well, how do you know the paint is going out that bloody window? And I thought, got you. And really, they're they try to stitch people up, but they're amateurs. They think it's easy. And I think for most people it would be easy.
Question about the Ark.
Sorry.
The area where you believe the Ark to be buried, why do you not think the landowners have been out and tried to dig that up, or anybody?
The Ark, well, why is nobody digging it up?
Yeah.
Be a major job.
Even just the landowners with a JCB, anything, just if somebody arrived at my house and said the Ark's buried there.
Let's look at it. We suspect there are at least 3 underground chambers there, right? The way they did it, and this has been proved in other sites, certainly in Derbyshire, you get an underground chamber that's always up on the top near a hill, right? On a man-made hill. There's a sump in the bottom, they make a sump, right? And they dig a tunnel down so it meets the outside, you follow? It's going down like that, and it meets the outside of the hill. And they make a bowl shape in the outside of the hill, okay? And the tunnel comes underneath the bowl shape, you got it? And they make a little tick upwards, a pit, the joint of it. So water runs down out of the chamber and seeps up, you follow me? And seeps out, it doesn't go rushing out. In those little pits, we found there are white stones, 3 different types. And we've had them analysed, you know, in a museum. And those stones can only be found in UK, in Cornwall. So they fetch 300 miles to put in these little holes. The trick is that those stones in combination, for some reason, no weeds will grow in that hole, so it won't clog. Keeps draining. So we know there are chambers. Now, the trick is this. If there are more chambers, somewhere the archives of the British nation are stored. I don't know if they're there, but I'm guessing I think they're there. I think that's where the archives, the records of us, our ancestors
I'll just chip in, Alan, to answer the question. I've spoken to the farmers several times, and they're apathetic. So they don't 100% believe the claim, and until you dig a hole, no one can believe the claim. But Alan suspects that they may have been got at, may have been told it's worth £2,000, it's not worth digging your land up, when in actual fact, if it is that,
it's not
priceless.
Just that. You see, if you dig a JCP, you could damage what's in the chambers. You see, you can't just do it.
You have
That's
had an archaeologist ring them as well, Alan, yeah?
Yeah, we know that at least one person has been to see them and has told them it's worth about 1,000, 2,000 quid. Leave it alone. And of course, he doesn't want us digging it, does he?
What do you perceive the Ark of the Covenant to be?
The question was, what do you perceive the Ark of the Covenant to be?
A box, a wooden box. Well, it should be plastered with... When I was a little boy, like all the other little boys in Cardiff, we were told the local bits and pieces. There's a legend in North Cardiff and up the valley, right? And it is that somewhere a great wooden box is buried, and it's guarded by 2 what they call cigfrangower. A cigfrangower is a giant raven. So there's 2 giant ravens on top of this box. Well, that does look a little bit like the 2 winged creatures that Moses put on top of the ark, you see? So it's long been known that a box was there.
It's alleged to contain the 2 tablets of stone with the 10 commandments written on them that was given to Moses on Mount Sinai.
Well, no.
Oh yeah, there are rumours that it contains advanced technology, yeah.
Well, I don't know that. All I can tell you is that, you see, after the war, the Germans had a hell of a problem because we dropped masses of bombs on their towns and their cities, and a lot of them didn't go off. So 20 feet down, 15 feet down, even 25 feet down, they had a 500,000-pound bomb or 200 bomb, right? The Germans then had to develop the best possible metal detectors in the world, and they did, which would detect these things right down. And they could differentiate between ferrous and non-ferrous metals, okay? We found out about this, and we had an Aussie who is a #1 guy in metal detection. He's the first man who found out how to detect, using a normal detector, how to adapt it underwater on a beach, you know? He came out to the UK and joined us, and we got hold of one of these German machines. So we can detect metal 30 feet down, okay? Now, it won't read a coin. If you put some pennies and coins on it, won't read it. It only reads larger objects. But we're not after little things, we're after big things. We're after the casket that's got the Holy Cross in it that was brought into Britain in 326 from Jerusalem, right? and we're after the Ark and things like that. And so we've got a metal detector that will find these things 20 feet down. The average thing that you use on a beach, you know, you see people going around mine detector, they go down, but what, 12 inches guaranteed and 15 inches maybe, you know. They're no good. The thing costs 7,000 quid, you know. So the Germans have developed and developed and developed these. They got one that's 20 feet long. How deep that'll go, I don't know. But the managing director of the German company is prepared to come over to Britain with his experts and do the work for nothing. We've already done it, like, you know, with our machine. So that would be independent of anything we have to say, wouldn't it? You see, we're not going to just say it, but we'll get another expert in. But so far, the Welsh are sitting there in a state of total shock.
All right, Alan, thank you very much indeed. Can I have a round of applause for Alan? Okay. Now, obviously the media controls people's minds massively, but there are more direct forms of mind control. And if we look at young people, the two things that hugely control young people's minds, the first is education, and the second is music. And if you've watched Neil Sanders on my show, it will blow your mind looking at how they blow their minds. But I'm going to talk about, in particular, Manchurian candidates. This is where people are hypnotized by some shady group to then go and murder someone so that they can escape the blame for that murder. And I think this is probably more prevalent than you might think. Recently, on the Derren Brown show, this is the entertainer and hypnotist Derren Brown, he actually covered Manchurian candidates, and he spoke about the Bobby Kennedy killer, Sirhan Sirhan. I don't think he actually killed Kennedy, but it was blamed on him. And it's fairly widely accepted now that he had been hypnotized and he was under mind control and blamed for the Bobby Kennedy murder. And what Derren Brown demonstrated in this program, he got a young lad, hypnotized him, give him a fake gun, and then they give him a role to play on a particular trigger. He goes to see a Stephen Fry talk, and Stephen Fry was in on it. The trigger was given when he was watching the talk, like this, a particular word that was said. The lad stood up, he shot Stephen Fry like this with these dummy bullets. Stephen Fry falls over, the tomato ketchup comes out. And then the guy's then interviewed, and he couldn't remember doing it. And it was extremely easy for Derren Brown to get this lad to supposedly kill Stephen Fry. So that when they say that you will not do anything under hypnosis that you wouldn't normally do, that's bollocks, basically, right? Now, I'm just going to list some possible Manchurian candidates. These are all in the UK or Europe. If I was to cover the American cases, we'll be here till next year, right? Now, I'm not saying all of these are Manchurian candidates. I'm saying that some of them might be, and I'm going to explain why. The first one, Michael Ryan, this was in 1987, and there's a young lad who lived with his mothers in his mid-late 20s. And one day, he had licensed weapons, as most of these people do, and he had semi-automatic weapons. He woke up one day, and he just went round his street, killing people at random. And he killed several people. These were all in his own street, and his mother came in. And she tried to stop him, and he just shot his own mother. Now, I've got quotations from a documentary where there was a woman and her mother were in a car, and they drove towards him while he was on this killing spree. And this woman said, I don't think that anyone believed it was Michael Ryan because a lot of the people injured came from South View, and they were his neighbours. So they couldn't understand that it was him. They couldn't believe it was him. And this is what she said. They pulled him in the car next to him, and he actually fired at them. They're very lucky to be alive through the windscreen or through the car. I think one of them was injured, but they sped off. And she said, because she looked at him right in the eye, and this is what she said. He just looked really like, don't know what the word is, brain dead. That's a bit of an exaggeration, just really not quite there. And many of the other witnesses referred to the blank expression on his face. And he later barricaded himself in a college, and they were trying to talk him out, and he was expressing concern over his mother. So it was as if he had been programmed, it had worn off. Now, you might say, well, what would be the motive for hypnotizing Ryan to kill all these people? It's straightforward. they made illegal all semi-automatic weapons in the UK after that happened. And they wouldn't have been able to do that if they hadn't had that. Okay, the next one, 1996, Thomas Hamilton. This is the Dunblane massacre. And I think most of the people here will probably know that this guy killed 16 children and a school teacher in a school, and then he killed himself. As often Manchurian candidates do, they're programmed to kill themselves because that means they can't then be unraveled, that it can't be found out that they've been programmed. But Thomas Hamilton was under investigation for being a paedophile. He had connections with some very, very high-ranking politicians. He was a Freemason. He ran a boys' club, and it's rumoured that he would recruit young boys for paedophiles. That's a rumour about him. Now, there was an inquiry into this because obviously the locals, people who lost their children, wanted to know what happened. So there was a government inquiry called the Cullen Inquiry. And certain findings in that inquiry, there was a secrecy notice put on it for 100 years. Now, that's unprecedented. You have a 30-year secrecy, 80, I think, or 70, 80, and 100. 100 is the maximum. So no one who was involved will be here when the truth is known about Dunblane. Now, they only put 100-year secrecy on something usually if it's a matter of national security. So you can possibly assume from that the high-ranking politicians that he knew had something to do with it, or were possibly being, you go on the internet, you'll find out about it. But yes, I think it's highly likely that Thomas Hamilton was a programmed killer. The next one I'll come back to, and the next one I'll come back to. Ralmo I'll do last. Now, Anders Breivik, 2011, he killed 77 people. This was in Norway, and there were several people who said they'd witnessed a second shooter. Because quite often with these cases, what we find that the person who's been programmed, there's someone else working in conjunction with them who's possibly an operative of some kind, making sure, maybe steering them, maybe firing a few bullets themselves. And this is the case in various American Manchurian candidate incidents at various colleges that have happened. Now Michael Atherton, this was in Peterlee, not far from here. He killed his partner, her sister, and the daughter, and then he killed himself. And the only reason why I put him there is because he was a taxi driver. Derek Bird was also a taxi driver. Now, I don't know whether that's relevant, but I'm just thinking that if you get in the back of a taxi with a taxi driver and you go on a long journey, it's quite possible they've got something that they can program them with. Maybe. I'm just thinking aloud with that one. Now, the last one, Mohammed Merah. This guy, they said in the news that he was listed as being an Islamic fundamentalist, and he was on a government list as being someone who was dangerous, that might, murder people. But it turned out, some Italian journalists revealed that he was actually working for French intelligence. So if he's an employee of French intelligence, he's not going to be an Islamic extremist. So they've probably turned him into a patsy, I would imagine. So I think it's highly likely that he was a programmed killer. Now, 2008, Sabina Eriksson. Let's just have a quick look at this one. This was a weird case. And I'm going to meet someone tomorrow who's been researching this case in detail. 2008, it's two Swedish twins, about 40 years old, and they're walking down the central reservation of the M6 motorway. And on CCTV, one of them just runs out in front of a car. So the police are called. And coincidentally, the BBC just so happened to have a film crew nearby. And all this is all on camera. There's been a documentary made about it called, I think it's Madness in the Fast Lane. They're being interviewed by the police on the hard shoulder. And then suddenly, one of them runs out in front of a truck and is seen to go under the wheels of this truck for no reason. Then, seconds later, the other one does exactly the same, is run over by a car. So the police eventually get one of them down after they've been hit by this car, and she's trying to escape. And she shouts out, they will take your organs. Anyway, one of them's taken to hospital with serious injuries. The other one's taken for interview. They ruled out any drugs. They ruled out any alcohol. Okay. Now, the one that wasn't quite as badly injured was released. Shortly after that, she met up with some guy that she just met in the street, I think. And then she stabs him and kills him. And then she walks off, hitting herself over the head with a brick, jumps off a bridge and breaks both her ankles. So she's then put on trial. I think she was eventually convicted of manslaughter. She wasn't done for murder for whatever reason, and she got a 5-year sentence. Now, at that trial, they were trying to explain why two women simultaneously would run out in front of the traffic. It just seems a crazy thing to do. And at that trial, well, sorry, in the documentary, they had this guy. They tend to wheel this guy out, Professor Nigel Eastman, when they're wanting to explain someone's psychology who's killed people, all right? And I think he's probably just bought and paid for to give the official line. Now, he was explaining that at this trial, the defense and prosecution had slightly different explanations as to why these women would run out. But they were both saying that these women had some kind of madness. And one of them said, well, the reason why the second woman ran out is because the psychosis was contagious. That's what he said. And this professor is saying this with a complete serious look on his face. Yes, we believe the psychosis. The sister caught it off the twin sister. It was contagious. So anyway, I rang this Eastman up. Well, I emailed him first. I said, look, I said, you realize you're being used, don't you? I said, have you not looked at the possibility that these two women were under mind control? Okay. And so I rang him up. I got through. And I said, you do realize you're being used? He says, oh, were you the one that sent me that email? I said, yeah. He says, oh, I'm going to have to put the phone down. He just put the phone down on us. He wouldn't speak to us. So there's definitely something with that case. And as I say, I hope to bring out a TV show covering that. Now, the next case, Derek Bird. Now, when someone just randomly kills 12 people, what I will do is look to see if there's a potential motive for perhaps one of those people to be gotten rid of. And this is what I did with the Derek Bird case. This was 2010 in the summer, Cumbria. So this guy, he killed 12 people. He was a taxi driver. He had no previous. And I spoke to a guy in Edinburgh who runs his taxi in the same area. And he said, every person who's got in his cab, he says this guy was the nicest guy on the planet, Derek Bird. Didn't have a bad bone in his body. Right? Now, these are the people he killed. This was a picture I got from the Sun newspaper. The second person in silhouette there was his solicitor, Kevin Commons. Now, the reason why this guy's killed 12 people, supposedly, these are the reasons the mainstream media have given. That he went out with a girl, a Thai girl, and he sent £1,000 to her, and she dumped him. That's the first reason that they say it might be. The second is that apparently 3 of these people worked at Sellafield, and he worked at Sellafield in 1990. And he left that employment under a cloud, and they were saying, oh, he was trying to get his own back on them. The other reason they put forward is that apparently there was a little bit of contention over his will, and they say that's why he killed his brother and his solicitor. But his father died in 1997, so this is a long time ago. So really they're plucking at straws with motives as to why he's done this. Now, I looked at these people, and Kevin Commons, I found a concrete motive. Now, I'm not saying this is the motive, but I'm saying that I don't think the police have looked at this motive, and they need to look at it as a potential motive. If we go back to November the previous year, in 2009, there was really bad flooding in Cumbria, in the area where these shootings took place. There was millions of pounds worth of damage, thousands of homes were flooded, and 1 police officer died in those floods. Now, Kevin Commons, the solicitor who was killed by Derek Bird, his firm of solicitors, and he ran the firm of solicitors, he was trying to sue United Utilities. That's the water company that's responsible for the water in that region. Okay? And what he was saying is that there's a reservoir, I think it's called Thirlmere, and what water companies can do, they can prevent flooding by diverting water around the network, open valves and this kind of thing. And Kevin Commons, he had obtained copies of United Utilities procedures for flood prevention, because apparently the rainfall was not unprecedented. All right? So they were saying the water company was liable for the floods. Okay? And he actually had a letter on his website, on the kevincommons.co.uk, which isn't there anymore, and I wish I'd downloaded it. And he was encouraging anyone who had had damage to their house, water damage, to print this letter out, because it had all of the reasons why he thought United Utilities had caused those floods, all of the technical reasons to do with the water industry and why they hadn't complied with certain regulations. And he was offering it free of charge. He was saying, you can print this letter out, just sign it. So United Utilities must have been getting hundreds of letters from the public, all wanting 10, 20, 30,000 pounds worth of compensation for the damage to their house. So you're talking millions of pounds. And if you read this article, you think, yeah, they could have been liable, all right? And remember, I said, 1 police officer died in those floods. So if United Utilities had been liable for those floods, the directors could possibly be facing a prison sentence. Now, a week before Derek Bird went on his killing spree, it was rumoured in the press that the chief executive was considering stepping down from United Utilities. This is him here. He's called Philip Green. And the managing director did step down in June 2010, around about the same time that the killings occurred. Here's Philip Green with a prostitute in a suit. And Philip Green has had many top jobs throughout industry. He used to be director and chief operating officer at Reuters PLC. So this guy's got some very, very top connections. So what I'm saying is, if they had been found liable for those floods, this guy possibly could have faced a prison sentence. And he's got all these high-ranking friends. And Kevin Commons was the second person shot by Derek Bird. I'm not saying that is the motive. I'm saying I don't think that anyone considers it. Now, we come on to Raoul Moat. Now, let me just say first off, up until the 29th of February this year, I just bought the whole news story the way it was presented, that it was somewhat a jealous lover, came out of prison, was upset at his girlfriend, so killed the new boyfriend, shot the girlfriend, and then just went a bit bonkers, and obviously shot Rathband, and then allegedly shot himself.
It all began 6 days ago when Raoul Moat was released from Durham prison after serving a short sentence for assault. On Friday, Northumbria police were warned that Raoul Moat may pose a risk to his former girlfriend, Samantha Stobbart. The next day, that threat became a reality. Raoul Moat is believed to have travelled to Berkeley in Gateshead and shot his ex-girlfriend's new partner, Chris Brown, killing him, then turning the gun on Samantha Stobbart. Less than 24 hours later, Moat made a 999 call to police threatening to shoot an officer. 12 minutes after that, in the early hours of Sunday morning, he shot PC David Rathband in an unprovoked attack in East Denton. The next sighting of him was late on Monday night, when he carried out an armed robbery at a fish and chip shop in Seaton, Delaval. The following morning, the black Lexus Moat was travelling in was found in Rothbury. A 2-mile exclusion zone was set up as armed police searched the area. That search continued overnight, and police today revealed that they have found the campsite where Moat is believed to have been staying.
And I thought, I didn't suspect any kind of mind programming at all, until Rathband allegedly killed himself, right? Now, the reason why I became suspicious is because as soon as Rathband had died, and this only came out in the media after he was dead, this story appeared, that Rathband had been dating somebody called Lisa French. And as soon as I saw that photograph, I went, whoa, something not right here. Anyone know who Lisa French is? She's a 7/7 bombing victim, right? Now, but she's a very important 7/7 bombing victim. I'll just explain. In the 7/7 bombings, 3 trains were blown up and a bus. She was on the bus that blew up. She had 2 eardrums perforated, she had teeth knocked out, and she was knocked unconscious. Now, the person that the mainstream media allege did that bombing was called Hasib Hussain. 6'4" Asian guy with a huge supposed backpack on him. And not one person on that bus, not one reliable witness on that bus said they saw him. No one. Okay? Now, Lisa French was on that bus and had given interviews, 2 interviews, I think, TV interviews, and never mentioned that she'd seen him either.
Although it's a sad day, actually the nicest part of the day is actually getting to meet up with those people that you have a really special bond with.
What did you actually say to Prince Charles, and what did he say to you?
He was just saying that really it was hard for him to understand what we've been through, and you know, he just expressed that it must have been an awful experience for me, and I was just telling him how really fortunate I was to have just come away with the light injuries that I did. July the 7th started like any other normal working day. I was travelling down to London. I arrived around 9 and everything looked pretty normal above ground, but I wasn't able to go down into the tube. We were told there was a small problem. I spoke to a steward who told me I could get on the number 30 and let me know which bus stop, and I was actually really pleased that it came, you know, within 5 minutes, and I thought I would get to my meeting a little bit late, but, you know, fairly good for what was going on that morning.
But you weren't going to make it. What actually happened?
The bus moved very, very slowly, and after 11 minutes we'd only made it into Tavistock Square. The next thing, there'd been a terrorist attack on our bus. I have absolutely no recollection of the blast itself. I was knocked unconscious. I woke up and thought I'd fainted, but then I'd spit out my 2 front teeth, and I realised that the lady next to me had also woken up. At that point I realised there was something wrong.
Had you really any sense of what had actually gone on there?
No, and it probably took me a few seconds to actually realise that the bus no longer had windows or a roof, and it was only when I looked across to the park and realised I wasn't looking at the park through a window anymore that I think the full scale of what had happened really started to filter through. There was glass glistening everywhere, and I remember seeing it flying through the air just like fairy dust. But when we looked behind us, there was literally nothing left. The couple we'd been talking to minutes before, we couldn't see any sign of them. There were no more seats behind us, and literally the bus just dropped away from where we were sat. We could see the people who weren't as lucky as us. We could see the engine of the bus sticking out, tangled bits of wreckage. It was horrific. The first year was really getting over the physical injuries, you know, my ear operation, getting my teeth fixed, and, you know, just getting a little bit of my energy back. And then I suppose sort of after that, then the emotional recovery, I suppose, you have to start that process as well.
Okay, I'm just going to read an extract from Nick Collestrom's book, which is available here if you want a copy. Okay, now the government held an inquest in 2010, November 2010, January 2011. And Nick Collestrom is talking about that inquest and the fact that Lisa French here actually gave evidence at that inquest. So this is 5 years, more than 5 years after the London bombings. The inquest heard the bus witness, Lisa French, seeming to recall the figure of Hasib Hussain on the top deck of the 30 bus, which had exploded in Tavistock Square. I made the decision, this is her speaking, not to go and sit next to him because I was aware we both had very big bags and that we, you know, would be taking up a lot of room. She recalled him carrying probably a laptop rucksack, quite large, sort of square. So I think that's why I thought it was a laptop bag rather than a camping rucksack. And I also had a big laptop bag. It was a squarish laptop bag like hers, only bigger, and he was carrying it in his hands and then wearing it over his shoulder. It goes on. That announcement from Lisa French at the inquest made headlines around the world. But why had we never heard about this before? This is the first instance of the inquest finding a witness who claimed to have seen something like one of the terrorists where he was supposed to be. She suddenly became famous from what looks like a new memory she had acquired. A moving account was given by Lisa French of the bomb blast at Tavistock Square in 2008 or early 2009, 3.5 years after the event. She had been diagnosed as having post-traumatic stress disorder and given cognitive behavioural therapy to try and cope with her life. And she didn't mention the terrorist in those interviews. In an earlier account, she explains how she blacked out during the blast, at the moment of the blast, so doesn't remember anything. But when she came to, people were talking about bomb and bus. A year after this detailed account, which has no hint of seeing a terrorist, she comes up with detailed memories of going up the stairs behind Hasib Hussain, implying she could recognise him, see him with his laptop bag, etc. Did the therapist plant a memory in her? She said, I went for quite a number of sessions,
over 20, with my psychologist, and he performed some cognitive behaviour therapy with me and also some rapid eye movement therapy too. The CBT therapy involved sort of some discussion around what had happened and how that made me feel, and also quite a lot of homework. So it's important to be able to commit to the process, and not only the hour that you spend with your psychologist, but you really do need a few hours every week at some point. It might not necessarily be during the day, but you need to have that commitment to that homework and preparation as part of the process.
So she's the only person at the inquest propping up the bogus government narrative. So she, Lisa French, is an extremely important witness for propping up their story. And she was going out with David Rathband. So why is this suspicious? Preparations for the government inquest into 7/7 were taking place in the early part of 2010. A pre-inquest hearing was held in June 2010. This means that witnesses taking part in the inquest, such as Lisa French, would probably have been contacted sometime in the months immediately before the Raoul Moat incident. If Lisa French was being prepared by a psychiatrist for the inquest to ensure she would say the right thing, it is possible David Rathband knew she was being set up to provide this testimony. And of course, being a police officer, he would be well aware of the importance of not interfering with witnesses before giving evidence. If this was indeed what happened, then Rathband could have presented a major problem if he were to go public with this information. However, mainstream media reported that the two did not meet until over a year later in August 2011 on Twitter, a claim which I find difficult to believe. This map, Rathband worked at Eagle Lane Police Station. He was a traffic cop. This white area here shows the zone that Eagle Lane covers. The red dot on the right is where Lisa French lives. Okay? Now, David Rathband would deal with hundreds of traffic incidents in that area. Lisa French lived on the edge of that area. Now, it said in mainstream media that he met her in August 2011 on Twitter. So this is a year after he's been blinded and disfigured. He's meeting women on Twitter. Now, I find that hard to believe. She was 35, he was 44, and he's chatting up women who live round the corner on Twitter. I personally think it's far more likely that he met her when he was a serving officer, maybe a year or two before the mainstream media have claimed. I do not know that, but I find it difficult to believe that they met on Twitter, and I think it's too coincidental that they lived, or he worked within a few miles of where she lived. And if you look at the map of the UK, that little blue area is that area, that white area that I've got. He worked there and she lived there. Now, another important aspect of this is the circumstances of the shooting. When I heard that Mort here had shot Rathband, I thought that Rathband's maybe pulled him over and went to check on the vehicle, and Mort's just shot him to try and get away. That's not what happened. Rathband was sitting on his own on the roundabout just up here where the A1 meets the A69 in the early hours of the morning, just sitting there on his own. Mort parks his car nearby, rings the police 12 minutes beforehand and says, "I'm going to kill this copper." And then he goes, shoots him through the windscreen. So what I'm saying is it's completely premeditated. Now, let's just hypothesize that Mort was a Manchurian and he was programmed to kill Rathband, right? The police have a computer system which tell them where every single traffic car is and which officer is in there. Someone at MI5 would have access to that. So they would know that PC Rathband would sit isolated for perhaps hours at a time in that position. So that would be a great time to trigger Mort to get in position, because they know he's there, they can see it on the computer screen, and then trigger his other program to go and do it. It's so contrived and it seems premeditated, the fact that he's actually rang the police and told them he's going to do it. There were other odd things about the circumstances. The two men who supposedly helped him, right, one of them got 40 years, the other one got 20 years. They were sitting in the car waiting for him while he was killing, or sorry, he didn't kill Rathband, while he shot Rathband. So I find that odd, because if they were robbing a bank, let's say, you can understand why an accomplice would wait, but two friends would sit there in the car waiting while their friend went and shot a police officer. That doesn't sound right to me. I mean, it might be right, but what I'm saying is that possibly they've been under some kind of mind control. Possibly. I'm just hypothesizing here because I don't think anyone's asked these questions. Now, it was in the media also that Raoul Moat was given psychiatric treatment in prison before he was released. Now, it said in the media that he had requested psychiatric treatment. Now, he's a bouncer in Newcastle. I don't know any bouncers that go around requesting psychiatric treatment, right? I suspect they gave him psychiatric treatment and they just said that he had requested it in case that information came out. Is this what happens to people who find out about false flag operations? These pictures were in the Sun newspaper, and they would never normally print such graphic images of serving police officers. So, I wanted to find out when Rathband did meet Lisa French. Maybe she did meet him on Twitter after he'd been blinded. I don't know. Something inside me just says, I don't believe that. I think she met him because I have heard from several people that he did have a reputation as being someone who, let's just say, liked women. And there's nothing wrong with that. Now, so I contacted Lisa French, okay? I telephoned her. I had a very brief conversation with her, and I said to her, look, I've got a TV show. Would you mind talking about 7/7, your experience? And I'm going to tell you what was said here. I said to her, I was wondering if you would answer a few questions about your experiences on the bus and also with PC David Rathband. She replied, I won't be answering any questions about David. Not Rathband, David. And then I said, can I ask why that is? She replied, because everything I've said has been misrepresented so far, so I won't be speaking about David. So what that means is we can't believe anything that we've read in the media about when she met him. So the question I ask, again, is when did they meet? It's a key thing, because if they met before he'd been shot, can of worms is opened up, in my opinion. I actually wrote to Lisa French as well, a very polite letter. I didn't mention anything about Manchurian candidates or anything like that. I just said that, you know, that I didn't think that, I agreed with her that the media had misrepresented things and would she like to speak about it, but she didn't contact me. So, when did this relationship start? I still don't know, and that's why I've put the appeal out on my TV show, because I want to find out from someone who knew one of them, a reliable witness. Now, another thing that happened, anyone remember the Paul Gascoigne incident over the Raoul Moat thing? Anyone remember it? This was weird. Just think about Paul Gascoigne for a second, because he's been in more psychiatric establishments than any of us, right? So the opportunities that they would have had to mess with Paul Gascoigne would have been numerous. And do remember that in the 1990s, he was a real icon, a very, very influential person that millions of people loved and followed. And I like Paul Gascoigne. I think he's a great guy. You know, it's just so unfortunate what's happened to him. But it's possible that they've messed with him then, because people who have influence over millions of other people, people like Britney Spears, for example, a lot of people think she's under mind control. Now, just watch this clip, right, and listen to some of the things that he says. So, of course, Paul Gascoigne's not a reliable witness. We know that. He's had alcohol problems and various other personal problems, but he says that he couldn't remember doing it. He found out because of the telephone messages. And the other thing that intrigues me is the fact that he said that he was convinced that he knew him, and then he found out that he didn't know him. So I don't know whether they've just, if they have done something to him, just as a bit of a diversion, really. Now, okay, so I'm just going to summarize reasons why I think Raoul Moat could have been a program killer. And a lot of people might be sitting thinking, oh, well, he was jealous over that girlfriend, he hated the police. They have to paint those motives in order to steer you down that. They have to make sure that they've got the motive fixed in the person's mind if they're going to do this. This is why they always kill more than one person. Okay, so reasons why Moat could have been a programmed killer. And the other thing just before this, all of these messages that he supposedly posted on Facebook and Twitter, not reliable evidence. They can have access to those systems and post them. Okay, Lisa French was the most important bus bomb witness at the sham inquest which propped up the government's false narrative. So there's a motive. Moat spent time in a government establishment immediately before his killing spree. Moat had treatment by a psychiatrist immediately before his killing spree. Moat shot multiple targets to hide the real motive. The killing was 100% premeditated. He was eventually killed, which prevents a psychiatrist examining him, deprogramming him, see if anything's been messed with. The circumstances seem pre-planned. The fact that Rathband was in an isolated, known location. Rathband meeting French on Twitter seems unlikely, and it's possibly a cover story. French's statement, where she says, everything I have said has been misrepresented so far, is suspicious. Mainstream media, this is another key factor, they only published details of their affair after Rathband had died, after he'd supposedly hung himself. And I'm even doubtful of that. So, when did this relationship start? That's the main question. Now, just to finish, the police never consider Manchurian candidates as an option when they get a murder investigation. I don't think there's any case where someone's been convicted. So, and I'm speaking rhetorically here. If you want to murder someone and get away with it, go to hypnosis classes, learn how to hypnotize people, find someone you don't like very much, and program them, because they'll blame it on them. I don't think there's any case where it's been brought to trial. Which is obviously why they use that method. And one final point, that mind control only becomes visible or suspected when the victim is used to perform an extreme act, such as murder. So these cases that I had on the screen before, I'm only suspecting mind control because they've done something so extreme. Imagine what else they could be using mind control for, programming people in positions of power, etc. It's really a question which I don't think anyone knows the answer to. But that ends the first section, which I've timed quite nicely to 12:30. We're going to have maybe half an hour break, something like that. So if we start at 5 to 1, I'm going to be talking about the Wilson and Blackett conspiracy. So I think, are you serving beer now, or they're serving beer? But thank you very much.